Hi everyone, this is Robert and welcome to IDG Live. Today we are looking at Book 3 of A Song of Ice and Fire, A Storm of Swords. We've, as you may know, if you've been watching this regularly, I'm going on a very slow reread or re-listen through the series. And for the previous two times when I reached the end of one of the books, I invited on a very fine guest who I'm delighted to say is back on again today to help us just unpick all of the details that you may have missed. Could you please say hi, Aziz?
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me back, Robert. It's great to talk about the books as a whole. We often zoom in on the smaller details, but looking at them, a whole entire book, that's like, wow, that's a lot to chop off at once. So it's fun to take the macro level. So let's have a good time today.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's the idea, is that we can try and think about the themes going through it, as well as if there's details and things that people may have missed. But try and look at it from quite a high level. What I think I'll do just to kick off, people usually find quite helpful. We sometimes forget exactly when different books begin and end. I'll give a very high level, just sort of synopsis, just to remind everyone of which bit of the story we're talking about, and then we'll just sort of get into it from there. So at a sort of a very top level, we're picking the story up. Still, while the War of the Five Kings is raging, although it's now down to the War of the Four Kings, is gone. Let's start in the sort of the Riverlands in the middle. Kat has released Jaime. She wants to get her children back. Jaime and Brienne head down south towards King's Landing. This is the first time we get a Jaime POV. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, as we're going through this. They have great adventures going all the way down, but probably the highlights of this are Jaime getting his hand chopped off. Then we get him at Harrenhal, sort of captured by Roose Bolton, but sent on his way, all very suspicious. He then goes back, collects Brienne, who was there with the bear and the maiden fair in the bear pit. They head down to King's Landing, and we see, and again, I really want to talk about this in a bit, but Jaime's character arc starts all the way through that. He arrives at King's Landing, not all is as he remembers. Perhaps he's changed a little bit, but his arc takes him down from Riverrun to freedom, as it were, back being there a Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. While that's happening, Rob's cunning plan off in the Westerlands to be getting Tywin's army out to take him on out into the Westerlands near Castle Rock, that's not worked. He heads back. He has, in the meantime, he's married Jane Westerling, and his alliance is starting to fall apart. He has to get back on the good side of the phrase. He manages to get Edmure to be agreeing. Well, he tells Edmure basically to be marrying Roslyn Frey. This seems to be the deal that will keep everything together. But then we get the Red Wedding. The Red Wedding being one of a number of massive moments in this story that have been sort of seemingly building up for quite some time. So that ends Rob's plan of sort of heading back up to the north, rather in a rather bloody way. But he's not the only one wandering around in the Riverlands. There's Arya. Arya gets caught up with the Brotherhood Without Banners. Then after that, she gets caught up with Sandor, the Hound. They're actually at the twins for the Red Wedding, but see what's happening and then escape away. The two of them then get involved in a fight. She leaves the Hound for dead and gets on the boat going over to Braavos, which is where we leave her. We're picking this up in the aftermath of the Battle of the Blackwater. If we're moving down to King's Landing now, we have Davos, who survived that somehow. He decides that he he is going to survive. He's going to go back to Dragonstone, and he's going to rid the world of Melisandre, who he blames for all of this, understandably. But he gets surprisingly named Hand of the King by Stannis. He saves Edric's storm, and then, having learned to read, he gets this missive. He's the only one who picks up on this missive, which was sent by Maester Aemon down to the Five Kings. He reports this up to Stannis, and this is when we get Stannis leaving the south, going with his army all the way up north to the Wall. Now, up at the Wall, things have been happening as well. We had the whole book opens at the Fist of the First Men. We get the prologue chapter, and basically the others are coming. A few people escape from that. Sam makes it down. Sadly, Gerald Mormont does not. Sam makes it down south of the Wall. So by the end of this book, he's back safely with Gilly in Castle Black. John had also managed to escape. He'd gone off on this separate mission. He gets caught up, pretends to be now one of the wildlings. There's the whole Ygritte, you know nothing, Jon Snow business. Climbs over the wall, comes back. He also ends up back at Castle Black. But that's when they come with it. The wildling army comes, attacks the wall. Jon Snow leads the defense. And they just about survive because Stannis arrives with his forces and takes out the wildlings. Where we end this bit of the story is Jon gets elected Lord Commander. So that's his arc. Goes from being having to pretend not to be loyal to the Night's Watch at all to end up to a point where he's actually the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Down in King's Landing again, the bits we missed out. Tyrion has lost. He was at the height of his powers at the end of last book. He's lost everything. He's no longer Hand of the King. He had that assassination attempt on him during the battle. He's got this huge scar. He's ill, presumed nearly dead for the first couple of chapters, really. Slowly comes back, realizes that everything that he thought he had, he's been losing. He's made to marry Sansa, but he keeps Shay, his mistress, with him. And then the Purple Wedding happens. He gets framed for the murder of Joffrey, but then he gets, eventually we get the whole Oberyn Martell versus the Mountain fighting for his life. Basically, he loses that, but gets rescued by Jaime and Varys. He falls out with Jaime, does get rescued by Varys, but en route kills Shay and his father. I think the only other bit, and Aziz, you can probably tell me if there must be something else, but the only other bit which is still away from the rest of the plot is Dany. And Dany has, where we left her the previous book, she's just got a couple of mysterious characters come to her from Illyrio Mapatis, basically saying, get on these boats and come to Pentos. She instead decides to make a stop off in Slavers Bay and get herself at Astapor. She decides to get herself the Unsullied. She frees the slaves of Astapor, goes up to Yunkai, frees the slaves of Yunkai, gets up to Meereen, frees the slaves of Meereen, but then realizes that she's just been abandoning cities behind her and they've just gone back bad, and so she decides to stay. In the meantime, she's discovered that she's got a couple of traitors there. Jorah, who she decides she can't forgive, she exiles him. And one of these mysterious characters who got sent to her is actually the legendary Sir Barristan, who she makes her new Lord Commander of her Queen's Guard. So that's the overall sort of plotline. The other thing to end with, actually, where the book ends, two big reveals. The first is Sansa gets taken away from, smuggled out of King's Landing by Littlefinger, up to the Vale. She's there pretending to be Elaine, but Littlefinger marries her aunt Lysa and then kills her. When in so doing, Lysa basically says, "Yeah, I." Admits that she killed her husband, which is a mystery that we'd had all the way back to the very, very beginning of this story. Then that's where we end there. And Littlefinger is clearly, he blames Marillion, the singer who happens to be there. And the other big reveal is Lady Stoneheart appears in the epilogue. Catelyn Stark was killed, but somehow came back. So that's my my big overview of what it was. Aziz, what have I missed, or what would you particularly want to sort of highlight about the story as a whole? This book.
Well, that's really hard to summarize that book. I mean, it has 82 chapters.
Yeah.
And it's massive. It has so many battles and twists and turns, and some plot lines overlap, but a lot of them don't overlap very much. And it does a few things a little bit differently. You know, every prologue, the prologue character dies. Technically, in this one, he doesn't die during the prologue. He dies a little bit afterwards. So that's, it's not that different, but it's interesting to note. This is the first book where most of the correct myself. The second book in a row where the most minutes, if you go by audiobook length, go to Tyrion. Clash of Kings also has the most Tyrion, but as you said, it's a very different Tyrion. His character shifts dramatically, not just in his power, but in his inner monologue. He becomes kind of sour and angry and fights with his father a lot, but ineffectually, just argues with him, whereas before he was one-upping people and everything. So yeah, there's a big change there. And as you said, there's several new POVs. That's a pretty big change. You have Jaime is added, and Davos is added, or not Davos, but Samwell is added. Davos was added previously. And we have the first epilogue where someone is killed. In fact, the first epilogue. We didn't have an epilogue to Game of Thrones or a Clash of Kings. The ends are sort of epilogue-ish, but they're not that way. And yeah, it's a pretty big moment, the end, because we didn't know that necessarily that was a thing that could happen that way. We didn't realize she would be around, and that Stoneheart would be there. And it's so well ordered. I love the order of the chapters. George does such a good job. When you look at it like this from the high level view, you really get to see why he does things in the order he does. I mean, just for example, talking about the end, Littlefinger kills Lysa and says only Cat, and then the final chapter following it is the reveal of what Cat is now. You have one Tully killed and you think the other one's dead, and I mean, it's semantics whether or not she's dead or not, but and a lot of times when you have a third act like this, it's meant to be the payoff. You have a lot of setup, a lot of movies that are trilogies or books that are just a trilogy rather than this series, which goes beyond its three. But the third act is often when a lot of big moments happen, a lot of climaxes occur. Now, of course, in this story, these are just climaxes that continue to set up further plot lines. But as we all know, Feast for Crows and Dance of Dragons is sort of a reset in a lot of ways. And George had intended it to be even a bigger of a reset when he originally designed the first few books in terms of structure. So yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. I think there's a reason why it's, for a lot of people, their favorite book, because it pays off a lot of what the first two books set up, and it does it so well. The moments are exciting, and you have 82 chapters of, 10 different POVs, not counting the prologue and epilogue, and each of them has a big payoff at the end that's been set up for several books. So it is really it is a storm of swords, but it's also a storm of payoffs from the earlier books and a storm of setups for the next one. And since it's the middle book out of the ones that we have so far, and it's been the middle book out of the ones we had so far for 12 years now, that makes it kind of special as well. So anyway, I could go on, but that's good for now.
No, absolutely. And I think it's probably just worth pointing out, we will talk about this a little bit more later, but the idea that George R. R. Martin had, having finished this book and then started trying to write the next one, was that there was going to be a 5-year gap. So he, for various reasons, didn't go with that, but you will see a lot of these characters end up in places where they could conceivably stay for a while. Dany could stay in Marine for a while. Arya could be staying and training up as an assassin. Sansa could stay in the Vale. So these characters often end up in places they could stay in. So it does feel very much like an end to one part of this story as much as anything else, I think. I
agree.
Gabriel Farrell, sort of, while we're still talking quite high level, Gabriel Farrell saying, "Hi, Robert. Hope you're well. I am. Thank you. As far as I can tell, the general consensus amongst the A Song of Ice and Fire fan base is that A Game of Thrones introduces the world and tone fantastically. A Clash of Kings expands on that very successfully, but A Storm of Swords is where the series really peaks, or at the very least, where so much happens and so much of what has come before it is paid off. How in line with this thinking are you after your latest reread?" I mean, I think I am pretty much with that. It has to be said. I sort of change my favorite book of the 5 quite regularly, as I suspect many people do, depending on which one you've most recently read. But it's certainly the story gets bigger and bigger up to this point, and then the next 2, it's been a while since you've read them, a reminder, the next 2 happen sort of concurrently in just focusing on different characters, so you don't get all of the storylines tangling together in the way that this does, and you hear you see people doing something in response to what's happened elsewhere in the Seven Kingdoms, which you're at the Purple Wedding and you suddenly get news of Balon Greyjoy's death and things, and that impacts on how characters are. That kind of thing, I think, works really well. But Aziz, impossible question, but where does this sort of rank then for you?
Probably number 2 right now. It's been number 1 before, like you said. I do change my rankings as well, and it does have a lot to do with recency bias quite a bit. And yeah, it's hard to pick. It is really hard to pick, but I think if I count where it's resided in the history of my fandom, it probably might. I could call it number 1, and because it was number 1 for me for probably 10 years at least. And I read it in 2001, so not too long after it came out, and so that's about half of its existence it spent as my favorite, and another half probably being the second favorite. And part of that is a quantity argument. Yeah, quality over quantity. I agree. Most people would probably say that. But what about when there's both?
Yes.
And this is Dance of the Dragons is slightly longer than A Storm of Swords, but only slightly, and they're both substantially longer than the other 3. Clash of Kings is the middle child in terms of length, but it's closer to the first 2 than it is to these 2. So that gives it a leg up. Just if you want to say they're all roughly equal, then you got to pick the one that's the longest, I guess. That gives it a leg up if we're really getting into the nitty gritty of rankings.
Yes, I mean, I have to admit, in terms of pure writing, I've got a soft spot for A Feast for Crows. I think that some of what happens there is his writing has developed incredibly well. But I can never quite get over my frustration when I did first read that, and I was there going, but I want to know what's going on with Tyrion. You can't just leave me like that. And there's 3 or 4 characters that I really cared about, and I just couldn't find out. But anyway, I hope that one answers that. We've had a few super chats through. Steve Ash, Lerner Turner, with his customary jokes. Can we have a guest? Because we have a guest, 2 jokes for the stream. First, a lady at the bank asked to check her balance, so I pushed her over. Thank you. Nice. And second, what's red and bad for your teeth? A brick. So thank you very much for and P.S. Mod Love. Thank you, Steve, for that. And Commander Wright also did a bad joke. I mean, overtaken by bad jokes here. What stopped winter from coming? Winter fell and it can't get up. Bad joke aside, super excited for this one. Thank you. But I also, Maura Lee, thank you very much, Maura. Very generous, saying just a show of love and support. Looking forward to watching this later after work. Well, hi to you for later. Actually, this is quite an interesting one. Lady Pushkin's saying, to me and Aziz, how do you remember and retain information? I find it very difficult. You make a lot of notes, post-it notes, markers in the books. Well, I can't speak for Aziz. I was brought up by a librarian, so the very idea of marking my books is it sends a shudder down my spine. So no, I don't. I do. All I can say is it's in terms of actually doing the research needed for doing a video is where I get and keep my information from. But I don't know. Are you a post-it note person?
I'm not a post-it note person. I do occasionally jot things down, but my my process for writing has changed. I'm sure yours has as well, as in terms of the resources available to us. Back 15 years ago, it was all notes and memory, and maybe bookmarks, internet bookmarks here and there. But since then, there's a lot of resources that have become available. A search of Ice and Fire is great, and then there's the George R. Martin and J.R. Tolkien Searcher, which both are ways you can look up, do keyword searches within the series. And I remember before those were available, I would have to open an ebook copy of every book, and World of Ice and Fire. I just have all of them open, and then I would have to search each one. If I had a phrase I was looking for, just search for that 6 times or 9 times if you're including Dunk and Egg, or however many, or 10 times if you're including the So Spake Martin archives. So yeah, maybe not the most direct answer, but I think a lot of it just has to be, just comes from being obsessed. So yeah,
I think
it sticks in your memory because you're just so hyper interested in it.
Let's go to an interesting question from one of my patrons about saying, it took me a long time to finally finish my reread of A Storm of Swords. I enjoyed the book first time even more this time. Arya is my absolute favorite. This is Whitney saying, so she's so young and traumatized from witnessing and experiencing so much violence. Her connection with Nymeria is still strong, and she walks into her several times. To what extent is she aware of her abilities as a warg and her connection with Nymeria? I think this is an interesting one, because it's. I'll have your thoughts on this one, Aziz, but I'll just sort of throw a couple of bits of context here. The first is that she's never been trained. This is actually true pretty much for all of the Starks, and so you see exactly how they're responding to this. And then secondly, it does appear that a lot of it, her thinking, definitely in this book, is more about this is dreams that she has, and she doesn't seem to be actively trying to be doing skin changing. But I'd be interested in your sort of take on this. How intentional is this?
Well, it's a great question. I agree.
It's not like, yeah.
Sorry, I think you froze for a second, so I started talking.
Oh, no. That's fine. You carry on talking. From my perspective, you froze for a bit, so I don't know. Somebody froze.
Okay,
yeah. How intentional is this, do you think, on her part?
I think I think right at the point of this book of Storm of Swords, she hasn't figured it out. It comes later. She says that she had a dream. Remember, she wakes up and Sandor says, listen, about your mother, because she complains that they ran away from the Red Wedding. She's like, we could have saved them. Like, we could have gone and saved them. Of course, that's ridiculous. They could not have saved them. But that's Arya for you. It's one of the reasons people like her so much, is she's got a humongous heart and is willing to do things that are impossible and dangerous because they're the right thing to do. And you need someone, an adult in the room to be like, no, let's not do that. So at the point she admits, she says, no, it doesn't matter. I dreamt, she's dead. I dreamt it, and Sandor just kind of nods, and it's noted that they go days without talking to each other at times because they're both sullen, and that works for them. One of the reasons they get along, I guess. But by the time of A Dance with Dragons, and she uses the cat to see what the kindly man is doing, that seems very intentional, and it's going to be hard for her to just ignore that afterwards and be like, oh yeah, I was able to see through a cat. That means nothing. And so I think she's becoming aware of it. Maybe she hasn't admitted to herself what it means. I don't think she's ready to call herself a skin changer or admit that's what's going on, especially because she's getting pressure. And you said this yourself. You said it very well, but I want to add to it. You said that she's not been trained in this at all. In fact, she's been trained against it. The faceless men are trying to make her forget who she was. Arya is the skin changer, not this ugly little girl or whatever persona she's wearing at the moment. And to forget that, they don't want her to do this. They want her to not have this thing, but it's part of who she is. And it's a clever device by George in that it keeps her rooted to what she really is. She really is a Stark, and this is like an anchor. She can't become truly no one if she's got this unique Stark-born ability that gives her an edge. And of course, she's just stubborn anyway. She kept Needle and these other things. There's other reasons to believe she's still Arya. She's extremely stubborn. So yeah, so I think long answer, but I think that this is a process. We're seeing her just naturally use the ability that's born to her, and over time, she's got to process what that means and think about it and be like, oh, not everybody can do this. And she's still very young. So especially at the point of Storm of Swords, it's just becoming into play. But I think maybe by the Winds of Winter is when we'll see her maybe turn it on and off on purpose more often. Because I think that's what we saw at the end of A Dance with Dragons, is that she did it intentionally rather than it just kind of happened all the other times. She has a dream. It's just an accident every time. Every other time it's a dream, but when she starts doing it on purpose, then I think that's a shift.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between, so if you read the Bran chapters, he's not had much by way of training, certainly until he gets up to Bloodraven, but then he is intentionally going into he's there. I think I'm going to go off and walk into summer, and then we'll go and have an investigate and see what we can. And it's very much he's sort of partly in control of what's going on. Arya, you just always feel she's just along for the ride. When she's asleep, stuff happens, she sees it, it just feels like a very vivid dream. That, I agree with you, that looks like it's slowly changing, but this part of the story, no, it's just she just sees and experiences stuff during her dreams. Pierre Davis saying, when reading the novel, did you think that Arya was murdered by Sandor? I mean, if you meant, did I think that Sandor...
With her head is like he hits her in the back of the head with the axe?
Oh, yes. I can't remember, to be honest. Can you remember the first time you read that?
Yeah, I do. I was confused by it, but I really didn't think... It didn't make sense to me. So I didn't think she was dead because it just didn't make sense that he would kill her. It's like, why would he kill her? Like, he's got her with him. She won't leave with him. Well, he just may as well leave by himself. It didn't add up. I did believe some of the other deaths, but this one felt wrong. It also happens really quickly. And it's the shortest chapter in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. It's only like 10 minutes long by audiobook length. And it happens in the midst of back and forth of the Red Wedding on the inside and outside. And I don't think I don't remember being fooled by that. I think
I think I'm with you on that one.
And it comes back so quickly. Like, it's not like you go several chapters. I think I actually have it in front of me here. Arya 6. It's Arya 3. Yeah, wait. Anyway, it's very brief. She's only out of action Yeah, it's chapter 50. Okay, here it is. Chapter 53, she gets knocked out. And then chapter 66, she's right back. So there's, yeah. And by the time and in between that, I mean, the Red Wedding happened. You know, much other, like lots of other things have happened. Like Robb and Catelyn definitely are dead. Well, I guess Catelyn maybe not technically, but it doesn't seem ambiguous at the time. And you have the outing of Barristan Selmy. You have Sam and Bran meet each other at the Black Gate in the Night Fort, and they talk about cold hands. You have the Purple Wedding and Sansa's escape, and the Edric smuggling moment for Davos, and the Battle of the Wall with Mag the Mighty crawling through the tunnel and all that. So you can be forgiven for not even stopping to think about it.
Yeah. I think that's it. I think that's what when I first read it, I was just charging through this so quickly, and there were so many things going on. No, I can't remember thinking, "Oh no, she's died as well." But yeah, it was interesting. One Mike Hanna saying, "A long time no see, Robert. Good to see you. A History of Westeros and IDG got me to finally read the books. Currently on Dance. Excellent. Well, that makes me very happy. I'm pleased to hear that." And I think I had another couple of questions here. Paul Taylor, what did you think about the Strangler having an antidote? The Tyrell chalice being poisoned from the start. Is the hairnet a red herring? So this is Purple Wedding. The Strangler is the poison which is used on Joffrey. And the chalice. So the chalice is it's massive when it's described as basically as a huge jewel encrusted chalice that Joffrey has for his wedding day, and the working assumption of this is that the way that the poisoning works is that you there's a scene when Olenna comes up to Sansa and sort of plays around with her hair, removes one of the stones from her hairnet. That then the thinking is the poison. Now, is it possibly that was the antidote? My take is no. I think this is all of the clues in there are very much point to the hairnet being the poison. It's from the when Arya's talking to the ghost of High Heart and she has the vision of the poison
purple serpents,
the serpents in her head, and also Sir Dontos hands her this hairnet right at the very beginning. Keep hold of this. You have to wear this. This is so important. So it's I think for me, I would just say that what the accepted wisdom seems fair on that, and unless you've got a country view, no, okay. Mike Hanna's doing a shout out to the mods as well. Thank you very much. Actually, we could do a little bit of mod love early on. If you're here watching this live, the reason why you're having such a fun time in the chat is because the moderators do an amazing job. So please do give them a little bit of love there in the chat. Let's go to a question from the King's Road, saying, "G'day, Robert and Aziz. Can you talk about Jaime's revelation to Tyrion regarding Tisha's or Tysha is her true identity? What effect does this have on Tyrion in the present, and how could his perception of the events and of his brother's lie shift over time to see the brothers reconcile?" So this is just when Tyrion's getting broken out of prison, basically, by Jaime and Varys. And Jaime, since he's arrived back in King's Landing, he's been sort of going on this, I'm going to make things right. And he tries to sort himself out with his father, with Cersei. And he's had this thing which has been clearly bothering him for years about Tisha, Tyrion's first wife. And he had told Tyrion that this was all just a monstrous jape that he had been running basically on behalf of his father, and that she was a sex worker, a prostitute, or whatever, whore, I think was probably the word he used. So actually the joke was really on Tyrion all the time, and she didn't love him. But he comes clean. He wants to come clean to Tyrion. He doesn't know when he's going to see him again, and he basically says, no, actually, she was what she appeared to be. She was a woman who fell in love with you. And then Tywin did all of those horrendous things to her, completely undeserved. So that's the context. And then so the question is, what effect does it have on him in the present, and how could his perception of that and the lie shift over time to see the brothers reconcile? I mean, I'll throw this one to you first, Aziz, if that's okay.
Sure.
What's your sort of reaction? How might this play out? It clearly plays on Tyrion's mind going into the next book.
Well, I think one of the things that Tyrion he goes through this very long period, obviously, that's mostly plays out during A Dance with Dragons. That is, maybe you could argue it's kicked off here. Well, it's definitely kicked off at the end. Arguably, it starts even before that, when he's lost power and he's reduced to a member of court and is getting pushed around and is kind of miserable and drinks a lot more. But either way, wherever you denote the beginning of it, it's a big change in his character. And by the end of A Dance with Dragons, you see him return to his old self a bit. He's wry, he's clever, he's joking. He doesn't seem to be quite as depressed. He has purpose. And I think part of that is hopefully going to include processing his father a little more deeply than he has. He definitely blames his father for a lot, and he's right to. Let's be honest, his father is a bad father. And if he thinks through that enough, he's going to realize that Jaime had as little agency as he did in a lot of these decisions. His father's just that domineering and that powerful. It's like, yeah, I'm like, Dad made me do that. Like, yeah, I didn't want to do it. I'm coming clean to you. I wasn't like in on it. Like, I came up with the idea. No, Father, you know, the guy that dominated the Seven Kingdoms, he made me do it. I think Tyrion might learn to grow some mercy or sympathy or forgiveness. Forgiveness is the right word for Jaime, because they were all subject to Tywin Lannister's cruelties, and him including them, forcing him to participate in his cruelties, which Tyrion himself did. I mean, Tyrion has to admit, like, he participated in this act as well, which I think is part of what makes him so mad. I think he realized some of it's his own guilt. He's like, yeah, I participated in the gang rape. He just kind of, he sort of brushes it off, and you really can't, like, that's awful. So I think he's got to face his own demons, which is part of what he's been doing as a, you know, outside of A Storm of Swords. A lot of that happens during A Storm of Swords, is just when it gets kicked off, when he finally has had enough of his father and realizes what kind of man he really is. And that drives him to kill him, which is going to take a while to get over. And that's why the healing process takes so long, and why it's not anywhere near completed. But yeah, I hope it comes out that he doesn't blame Jaime for things that their father made them both do, and that Jaime probably isn't any more guilty than Tyrion is, really, if you add it up in terms of how Tysha was treated. So, or arguably Tyrion's worse, because that's who, like, he's the one that had a relationship with her. So some of it might be self-loathing, which Tyrion does have a lot of. And yeah, it's a long journey for him, literally and figuratively. I mean, heck, he goes all the way to Slaver's Bay. He's going to probably meet Daenerys. And it's interesting to think back here in A Storm of Swords, where all that begins. Like, you look at, like, Varys' manipulation of him, and how Varys has been planning to use Tyrion for their side, to recruit him, just like he recruited Barristan, just like he recruited, I guess, Illyrio way back when. I don't know. Like, it's a whole, let's not get too deep into Varys right now. But yeah, that's when all this begins. Like, Tyrion's new arc, though, the long term, the thing that matters most to him, the reconciliation and conflict with his family, really kicks off in A Storm of Swords. You just get the beginning of it, and in A Clash of Kings and A Storm of Swords, or in A Game of Thrones, you're introduced to the conflict with his family, but it doesn't progress very much. It's just there. He becomes Hand of the King. He does a good job. He shows what he's capable of. Then he loses it, and that begins his journey to changing sides. And it's not a simple thing, because he's a deep character with a lot of conflict and a lot of pathos and a lot of trauma. And as we pointed out, he's the character not only with the most screen time in this book, but in the previous book as well. And if you jump forward to A Dance with Dragons, I think he's number 2 or 3 in that one too. Let me check real quick. I got it right here. Yeah, he's number 2 in that one by 3 minutes. John only beats him by 3 minutes. So really, he's basically tied for first. So he's the most on-screen character there is in the entire series, I think, besides maybe John. And I haven't done the full math, but yeah. So there's obviously so much focus on him, and that's why there's so much to say.
There is, and I think the other thing I would sort of say regarding him and Jamie is they're on I wouldn't say sort of parallel arcs, but there are definite echoes between the two of them, in that we meet them both when they've got the same kind of Lannister just pride, arrogance going on, and then in this book, both of them, it starts getting unpicked. The things that they relied on just start falling away from them. For Jamie, he loses his hand, which means he can't fight. Then a lot of his relationship with Cersei just starts to going really bad. Everything, his relationship with his father is ruined. The relationship with Tyrion seems to be broken. Everything starts being unpicked. So what you see going forward for him after that is him trying to figure out who he is now and where he's going to go now. And similarly, Tyrion in this book, who he is and kind of his feeling of self-worth gets unpicked all the way through this book. He thinks that Shay might have feelings for him. It turns out that she didn't. He thought he did a really good job defending King's Landing, which he did, to be fair, but he actually just gets kicked out. From that, he thinks maybe now this time his father's going to recognize that, and maybe I'll sort of get Castle Rock, and it's a no on that one. And he has all of these things until he ends up at the point where he's just saying, I am the monster that you all say I am. And it's almost, he reaches this black point there. And from there, his next journey is trying to pick up on who he is and what he actually wants and needs. And so the Tisha Taisha thing, it plays through his mind all the time, because it was horrendous what he learned, but it suddenly would have dawned on him there was somebody who loved him for who he was. And I think that's the thing that really is sticking with him all through this, is this, he thinks at the moment that he's saying, I am unlovable, I'm horrible, he has got to that point by learning that someone did love him. And I think that is the thing, that the key thing that is sort of he is battling with. And you see him discovering who he is as much, interestingly, in when he's on the Shy Maid. This is in a couple of books' time, A Dance with Dragons. He's writing a book about dragons, which is when he was younger, this was what he was obsessed with. And this is suddenly he's able to be himself without any other pretensions.
Well said. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, and this is the book where that theme of love is really explored, where he realizes that that's what he wanted. That it's mentioned so many times. Like his father makes fun of him for that. He's like, "What do you think, Shay? You think your whores really love you? And things like that."
Talking as we're talking about Jamie, and Ninja Robbo says, hi Robert, your last 2 book rewinds were excellent, so I'm excited for this one. Jamie is probably my favorite character in the series. I love all the character twists from hero to villain and back again. I think this is the first book we get his POV, but almost certainly the one with the most character development for him, with Brienne losing his hand and whatnot. I'd love you to just wax lyrical on him, which we have. I think to a degree already, so hopefully that's there. But he did sort of go on to say, speaking of Aziz, any chance of the podcast of Surprise returning? It was excellent. Or are there any more IDG Witcher book content which would also be exciting? I mean, I don't know where you're at on the podcast of Surprise Witcher stuff on this channel. Yes, I'm still focusing. I've got a video that I've half written about Nilfgaard. I think just trying to explain what all of these different wars they're doing are and what's actually going on there. But podcast of Surprise, I think you've ended that. Have I?
Yeah, we discontinued it. We had a lot of troubles with on the personnel side, with our members having lots of unfortunate things happen in their real lives that had made it a struggle to be consistent. And on top of the show just not doing as well as we would have hoped. It didn't bring as many new readers to the fandom as we thought it might after its strong start. And obviously your own opinions of the show may vary, but the fact is it has declined in viewership and in interest, so that's not great.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to a question. Thank you. Let's go to a question. Victoria Gill saying Lysa Tully appears quite mentally unstable, particularly in this book. Was there any hint at why? Was it her marriage, her isolation in the Eyrie? This isn't something I've sort of really dug into, the sort of the why of this, other than the things that you've sort of mentioned there. That clearly she was going to a completely different place, a place of isolation, and she became obsessed with her son and the potential for losing her son, and she was clearly madly in love with somebody that she couldn't be with. So there were lots of factors all working in there. Aziz, is there anything from your perspective that you would sort of add as a kind of an overarching narrative? Because it clearly takes Kat by surprise. She knew what her sister was like generally, but when she actually meets her in book one, it's like, oh, this isn't what she used to be like. And then when we see her in this book, then she's clearly even further gone down that route. Have you got any extra insights to add in?
Yeah, there's two things I would add in particular. One is that she has some guilt, and two, that there's some trauma, and those two things kind of relate. The trauma is, of course, her father forcing her to abort her child with Littlefinger, or just something along, presuming that's what happened. It seems very likely that is what happened, and that made her sad, and it wasn't something she wanted to do. She wanted to have that child, and she also, maybe related to that, or maybe this is separate and maybe doesn't quite rise to the level of trauma, but she kind of was second shrift on a lot of things. She had to marry an old man, where Kat got to marry someone her age. Kat was better looking and older and was treated like an heir for a little while, and just had, from Lysa's point of view, Kat got the better end of the deal. She had more children, and then so her life just worked out not as well. And then add her natural paranoia, and this gets to the guilt. She knows she lied to her sister about the death of John. She knows she killed her own husband, and even though Littlefinger talked her into doing it, I don't think that she's 100% bought in subconsciously on the actions that he's led her to do. Lying to her own family, murdering her own husband. I mean, the father of her child. I mean, it's hard to keep that on. You got to be a villain to do those things and still sleep at night. And Lysa's not a villain. She's just a sad, traumatized person that is paranoid and protective of her child who's has health problems. There's lots of negative things you could say about her. I'm not trying to say she's a good person, but she's nowhere. She's more of a victim in Littlefinger's schemes than she is some sort of instigator. She's someone that Littlefinger targeted because of her weakness, and she's like, oh, this is someone I can manipulate. Oh yeah, this piques his ambition. He wanted to get in with the Tully family. He wanted to rise high, and someone like her is a step on his ladder of climbing, chaos is a ladder. Well, she was one of his biggest steps up on that ladder, I guess you could say. So, and she knows it to some degree. I think a part of her suspects it, but she can't face it. Maybe, who knows exactly? Because it's fair to say she has some mental illness on top of all that, which would just make it even harder to process and handle.
Yeah. I mean, I think the guilt one is a really interesting angle on this one. I'd not really thought about much until I've saw another video that I'm sort of partly writing is just who killed John Arryn, which is one of those things that we all kind of take for granted, I guess, but it's still, I think, a lot of people slightly get a bit uncertain about how that whole thing panned out. But when I was researching that, I was reminded of the actual oddity of the fact that when Cat turns up with Tyrion, Lysa then immediately pivots to, and he killed John Arryn.
Like, what? Yeah, it's like, did he?
Yes, and the reader, when you read it, you go, I don't think that's
so.
What's going on here. And Tyrion is clearly confused, and Cat's confused because she's had a letter from Lysa saying it was Cersei. And so probably what was happening there was that she'd just thought on her feet, if I can get this guy convicted of this in front of gods and men, then I'm in the clear, because I know I did it, but I can't say that I did it. And if I can get somebody else who is sort of convicted officially of doing it, then that's fine. And that does seem to sort of be sitting with her, and I think it's very noticeable that when she's very at the very end of this book, when we get that she confronts Sansa, she's basically Littlefinger kisses Sansa and she's blaming Sansa for this, and she's screaming at her, and then Littlefinger comes and tries to calm everything down. She immediately goes straight to talking about that murder. Well, that wasn't the conversation that was going on at all. So she goes on this pivot when he says something like, "There's no need for tears," and she says, "Tears? You said there was need for the tears of Lys when you said when I poisoned that." And it's like that clearly that her brain was waiting for a connection to get across to that.
I felt like a manic episode there, maybe, or I'm no psychologist, but that's what I think of when I see what she's just like stream of consciousness, like these words she's lost all context. She's like, tears of Lys, you mean, just that these things aren't connected, like she was talking about actual tear. So she's just that it's unkind to call that unhinged, but it also kind of describes it fairly well.
Yes. Absolutely. The Mike Hanna with the question: can you discuss the anti-conception that Luda took and the relationship to the Westerling situation? I don't know whether that's a typo for Lysa.
Probably.
Probably. So this is way back in the mists of time when she was younger, and she fell pregnant with Littlefinger's. This is when they were at River Run and when they were much younger. Fell pregnant with Littlefinger's child, and then her father Hoster forced her basically to lose that child. Something that leaves him with huge amounts of guilt that we see pouring out when he's sort of at death's door himself. How does that tie in with the Westerling situation? So the Westerling situation, we have Rob's wife, Jane Westerling, it would appear isn't pregnant. I know some people have argued that perhaps she could be. I find that quite unlikely myself. But the reason why she isn't pregnant, her mother says, is because she's been giving her moon tea regularly to make sure that didn't happen. So what's the sort of the connection? I mean, I think this is a thematic one that George R. R. Martin is sort of showing us, because it's the parent who is sort of administering this, and the parent who's deciding and what happens in that person's life, and one of this, it was very well known, as in Lysa knew what was happening, but Jane did not know what was happening. So maybe he's just sort of like saying, well, which is, these are both bad things, but compare and contrast them in your mind. I think that's probably where I would say that one is. Pierre Davis, any Jalabar Joe theories? Oh, interesting. So this
Deep
is a
cut.
character who is always kind of in the background. He's in King's Landing. He's from the Summer Isles, I believe. And he sort of managed to get himself into the court of King's Landing. He seems quite a flamboyant kind of character, dressed differently, very strong, different accent. And he's sort of there. You sort of see him appearing in, just sort of the stands where there's tourneys, or when there's, like, I think he escorts Tyrion once when they're going, or maybe even when they go to see off Marcella. He's sort of always there and thereabouts. He's one of the people who gets accused of being one of Marjorie's, I think's lovers. But there's never really much of a plot line around him. So, I mean, my instinct, and perhaps I'm missing something here, so I'd be very happy for you to give me a great theory, Aziz. My instinct is that he's just an interesting background character that George R. R. Martin has introduced, because not everyone has to be a secret spy or secretly somebody else. I think he's just an interesting character. But have I missed something?
You're so wrong. No, I agree with you. I agree with you. Yeah, I haven't had reason to suspect him of being part of anything, or a hidden agent or anything like that. I do think it's interesting because he may have had more of a purpose. George does that sort of thing where he creates characters and gives himself options, and he's skilled enough that by giving yourself enough options and expanding on your world and being thorough with the world building and the characters that are in the setting, he has the option to give Jalabar Joe some additional plot, or maybe he did plan on it all along. But by making these characters more living and breathing and having these, he doesn't have to just introduce somebody new, which he has had to do occasionally. George is, it's such a vast world, and arguably a character that was sort of added after the fact is Darkstar. This cadet branch of the Danes was, it could have just not been mentioned before. It worked. I don't think it doesn't feel like a retrofit, but if you look at it closely, you're like, that was probably added well after George's initial plans, which is fine because, again, it was done well. But so I think Jalabar Joe might have been one of those type of characters where he gave himself the option to use that character, and he still might. Certainly Jalabar Joe was involved as a cat's paw or a fall guy in Cersei's Marjorie plotline. And in fact, Jalabar was kind of the lucky one there. They're like, well, we need some people to blame, but we'll let a few of them off because then it looks like we're being fair. And so Jalabar gets to be that guy. Like, we're going to accuse him, but we're going to let him go. So he has no idea of any of this. And apparently he doesn't even speak the language. So I don't know, maybe eventually George will have had him learn the common tongue, and maybe he'll connect to the Cinnamon Wind, the characters that Sam met there and at the Citadel, and I don't know. But yeah, I have my doubts too. I think he's just he's just part of George's thorough world building, and maybe someone George created to give himself an option that probably hasn't been picked up on, at least not yet, but could be. Yeah.
Yes, I thought he did speak common, but maybe.
I think you're right. I think he has picked it up now, because he definitely didn't in book one, but I think he did say some things at his own trial, which is like he must have learned, and that's been that's like 2 years, so it makes sense that he would learn some common in the meantime. After all that, what else are you going to do with his time? I mean, jeez.
Pierre Davis saying, "Is there a Missandei connection with the show?" I don't think so. So he's from, she's from North. He's from the Summer Isles.
Right.
I mean, don't think that there is a particular link there. Again, with all of these things, and I think you said that quite well, actually, what George R. R. Martin likes to do is create possibilities that he could build on later. And this is all part of his Gardner writing approach, is that he's not got this all planned out from beginning to end. He knows his rough endpoint, and he knows roughly how he was planning on going there, but he might go off by a slightly different route. And in that, maybe we will find out that there's some link here or something like that we don't know about. He has given that he's left that open as a possibility, but at the moment, no, we don't have that. Let's go to a question from Diego Godoy saying, Hola, Robert and Aziz. Hola to you. What caught you by surprise on this reread of Storm of Swords? Did it leave you with any new insights for your understanding of A Song of Ice and Fire? Well, I mean, I'll happily sort of start on that one, because, I mean, this is Aziz rereads the books at a frightening rate, and this one is one thing I tried deliberately to do here. I've probably explained this on every time we've done one of these ones, but this is my first time listening through the books.
I didn't realize that.
I've read them through before, obviously, several times, but listening means that you hear things from different angles. The things there might be things emphasized in the voice, in the telling, whatever, and allows you to experience things in slightly different ways. And also, I've deliberately done this chapter by chapter. So I'm not charging through, just trying to get through this. I'm stopping. George R. R. Martin this is one of the key things about the way that he writes this story, is that he does treat each chapter effectively as a standalone story. It often has like a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's got some kind of issue or conflict that needs resolution, and whether that's an actual physical thing that needs to be got past, or whether that's a kind of an emotional thing. If you look at each chapter on its own merits, then you can learn a huge amount by just stopping and thinking, okay, well, where did we start and where did we end? And for me, the thing, I mean, I'm sure there were several, but the one which came to mind when I was reading this question was something that I knew before, but I hadn't really got figured in my head. One of the things I went into this was that just before I started this re-listen, somebody perhaps on one of these live streams had said something along the lines of, is there any evidence that Davos was actually saved by the Merlin King or the drowned god, or something along those lines? And so I went into that chapter. The first chapter is one of the first chapters we have in this book, is a Davos chapter, and I went into that keeping an eye open for, are there any clues that this is, is he like Patchface? Do we think maybe he kind of died and then came back or something like that? So I was keeping an eye open, and the arc of that chapter is basically, it's Davos on a rock in Blackwater Bay, and he's deciding to live. And that's the arc. It's that he starts out, he remembers back to what's happened. He thinks about, how terrible what he's lost. He thinks a ship is going very close by. He thinks, I might just let that go. There won't be another one along, and I'll probably die before the next ship. And he has this epiphany, really. He hears, I think I've got a question on this, so I'm not going to dig into it too much, but he hears the mother's voice. He is religious from the Faith of the Seven. And this is something that really struck me first in response to what I came into this with, is that he clearly does not say that he survived because of the drowned god, Merlin King, whatever. He, if anything, says this was the mother, this was the Faith of the Seven, that the Seven saved him. But then he is also, and this is now changing my mind in how I see Davos as a character, he's a lot more religious than you first think. Perhaps it's because on the TV show they didn't play this up really at all. They just had him as this kind of like very grounded, down-to-earth kind of guy who's very quite humanist. He actually came across, I felt, on the TV show. But in the books, he is very driven faith driven, certainly in this section here, and this then makes it a clash of faiths with Melisandre. Is that his drive to confront her is not just the I think that she's bad and is corrupting Stannis. He thinks that actually she's got it wrong. Her faith, the wrong faith, wrong God, and the faith of the Seven needs to be sorting this out. So
it isn't just a small matter, right? It's like this is the world depends on having the right faith in her mind. Yeah, that's really well said, Robert. Yeah, I like that.
Thank you. Is there anything from your side the last time you were sort of looking at this that made you kind of like, oh, that's just letting me see things in a slightly different way, or has something surprised you when you saw it again?
Yeah, well, to add on to what you said first, I'll say that you're right about Davos and his faith, and it's somewhat how he's introduced with the burning of the faith of the 7 statues. That's like the first scene we have of him, and he didn't like it. It's actually through Crescent's point of view, so we don't fully see his feelings on it, but later you get he says out loud that he doesn't think it's good, and his own sons some of them are turning to the Red God, and he's not happy with that either. So it makes him uncomfortable. But yeah, as far as my own most recent read through, and maybe something I noticed that I may not have, or that I've maybe focused on a little more this time, I've been trying to think more about, my approach has always been, when I first started, was very nerd oriented, in that I would focus on details and world building, and as the longer I do this, the more I focus on literary themes and try to merge all that. I'm not trying to end talking about one for the other. I still am primarily a world building nerd, above all other things, but I'm trying to round out my ability to talk about the series. It involves learning to speak to it on different terms, and that's something I've been trying to get better at, just following the character arcs and appreciating this work for how difficult it must be compared to other works, and how the largeness of it is part of what makes so much of it work well. And because it enables us to get lost in the details, if we can narrow every plot line down to a couple of different points, it becomes, you can figure it out. Because let's be honest, there's a lot of plot lines in A Song of Ice and Fire we have figured out, or at least think we have. And if that were true for most of the plot lines, we wouldn't probably still be talking about it in between books like we are. This book, we're talking about a book that's more than 20 years old, and there's still a lot of huge mysteries and things and worth discussing, dynamics and character interactions and believable social networks. That's something I've learned recently, trying to pick up on how academics view A Song of Ice and Fire. And I read a research paper on why A Song of Ice and Fire is addictive. And one of the conclusions was, this is a large team of researchers with all sorts of advanced degrees between them and individually. And it's just it's like reading Daenerys's titles, like this person is Professor Emeritus at this and this and that. And it's like, all right, well, these people certainly seem to have the accreditation. And one of the things they talk about is how well A Song of Ice and Fire mirrors real life interactions in terms of how we talk to each other, how we think, and how connections are made within social networks, like how people talk to each other and become acquainted and have relationships, stuff that seems kind of basic, but that a lot of authors aren't able to capture with the written word. TV shows can do it a little better because it's already people doing people things on screen, and you see them, and they're standing certain ways, and they have facial expressions, so it all feels a little more natural. But it's more of a challenge in some ways for the written word, especially with stories being so internal, so much of it being like narration of their internal thoughts. So that's something I've been trying to think more about, is literary themes, things that move us in the real world compared to how they're moved within the story, and trying to find common ground with the characters, which I think brings you closer to them and makes the world feel more believable, which it already is. So, yeah, I guess that's the end of my answer.
No, well, it's a good one. There was just sort of picking up the literary themes. Andrew K in the chat saying Davos is definitely one of those true knights. He still fits the bill for me because he is somewhat derided for status and knighthood. And yeah, I mean, this is very true because we don't think of him as being a knight, but he is. He's Sir Davos. And this is one of those themes that George R. R. Martin keeps coming back to, is what makes a true knight. And we get a lot of that here. In particularly, we obviously get Brienne, who's one of the classic examples of this, is that she technically is not a knight, but she lives by the knightly virtues. She's a great fighter as well. She looks like a knight. So that's all there. And then we're also, I think, being invited to wonder about Jaime, because he is there. He looks like it, but we're all thinking, oh, he's not really, because he's really quite a nasty guy. He pushes children out of the top of towers and things like that. But then through this book, we're invited to start understanding who he is and seeing that the thing that he's derided for the most, the thing which gives him all of these Oathbreaker and Kingslayer and things like that, these bad nicknames that tarnishes his image, actually the way he sees this is that was probably the most heroic thing he ever did, the most true knight thing, and the world is seeing that as the opposite. So yeah, this is definitely a theme, and Davos, I think, is probably on a slightly lesser scale than them, but along this archetype that George R. R. Martin is using a lot. Let's go to Corvus Corax, saying, good evening, Robert, Aziz, and Dan. Dan is not here. He's taken himself up to bed, as he often does at this time of night. Lady Smallwood has sent her daughter to Old Town for safety. Has there been mention of other highborn lords and ladies doing this? If your predictions of a battle at Old Town take place in the coming books, what can we infer about the lasting effects on the large houses if their children and heirs all die there? Well, this is an interesting. Lady Smallwood is quite a fun character, actually. I quite like her.
Yes.
She appears here. She's a Riverlands lady, and Arya is with the Brotherhood Without Banners, and they kind of stop off at her place, and then Lady Smallwood kind of fusses over Arya and sort of tries to treat her like a lady, which obviously Arya doesn't. It doesn't like at all. But as a sort of an offhand comment, she does say yes, she sent a daughter off down to Old Town because of the war. Now, I think just to kind of like answer the bigger question here, Aziz, I'd love to hear if you can think of anyone else that has done that. My general feeling is that this isn't a mass exodus of people sending their children off to Old Town. Firstly, from where would it be that the North wouldn't be doing that? You wouldn't do that if you're in the Vale. They wouldn't do that if you're in Dawn. No. So if there's any part of the world where that happens, then it's probably the Riverlands, which is always where all of the battles happen. And it's probably just the sort of the mid to small houses, because the larger houses, they're wanting their children to stay there to be part of the leading the forces and the like. If you're really poor, then you can't trudge your way all the way down to Old Town. It's that if you've got a little bit of cash, and you're not right at the top, you might be able to get away with it. But do you know of any others that have done this kind of like evacuating their own children to Old Town?
I feel like there's a few others, but no, I can't think of any off the top of my head. But I agree that there's a lot of places that just it wouldn't be feasible or the right thing to do, or they're safer where they already are. But there's definitely some places where you could see that happening. Ironically, some of those places are because of prior Ironborn attacks. Right? They attacked the Shield Islands, and that was quite successful. And now there's the issue at Brightwater Keep, well, not now, that's been going on. It was where Garland Tyrell was going to lead an army, but instead he was diverted to leading an army towards the Shield Islands. So there probably are a few houses in the Reach that are nearish to Old Town that have done this that we don't know about. And yeah, it might be a huge mistake, or at least turn out to be a huge mistake. It might be a good idea in theory. But yeah, who would expect Old Town to be taken? It hasn't been seized, especially not by the Ironborn. It's been over 1,000 years, I think. We do know that it happened. I think it was Kored the Cruel that took it, and there's some ways that it looks like what Kored did to Old Town might be similar to what Euron potentially pulls off without the supernatural stuff, but taking huge amounts of captives, potentially doing things that aren't very Westerosi, like selling them into slavery and or effectively taking them as slaves, because let's be honest, thralls are, it's very much a semantic argument that separates the two.
Yes, for those who haven't sort of aren't really up to speed with this accepted wisdom, I think I can probably call it that within the Song of Ice and Fire community, that Euron, he's wanting a big fleet battle. He's been waiting for the fleets to be coming towards him so we can start, and he's been strapping people to the front of his boats and things like that, which we saw from the pre-release chapter from the Winds of Winter. But also, if you start reading between the lines, you can see that there have been a few Ironborn who've been captured in Old Town. The thinking is that they're spies, just sort of trying to figure out the defenses. And if Euron, and we know he's got massive ambition, if he is wanting to be taking that corner of Westeros, the place you go is Old Town. So the generally accepted wisdom is that he's probably got a big sea battle to deal with first. And then after that, he will probably come in and attack Old Town, which helpfully kind of segues into this other question from one of my patrons, Raven's Oath, saying, hello, Robert and Aziz. The Song of Ice and Fire community accepts plenty as fact that is still technically headcanon or unshown in the books. For good reason. A lot of very smart readers have been discussing it together for 25 years. My question is this: where do you both go against the grain with common held beliefs or answers of theories in A Song of Ice and Fire? Now, I've found this, and Raven's Oath saying, mine is that Lyanna is not the Knight of the Laughing Tree. I'm with the sort of the majority view on that one in particular, that I think Lyanna is the Knight of the Laughing Tree. But Aziz, have you got any bits where most of the community think one thing and you think another?
Good question. Nothing leaps to mind, but let me think for a second. I'm a little different than a lot of people on how I view Tyrion, the Tyrion Targaryen theory. I don't believe in it, but I'm open to it, where I think it's very unpopular in my experience. People really, really hate it overall if I'm looking at the fandom as a whole. And so maybe that's one small thing that I'm a little different on, is that I don't hate that theory. But another one would be perhaps some of the stuff I see with Dany coming, I think is, maybe a little darker than some people are comfortable with. Same goes for Arya, and same goes for Bran. I think there's just a lot of the younger characters are going to do some morally gray things that we might understand, but will be uncomfortable with, and might not understand. It might just be like, oh, that's bad. But there's going to be some really difficult decisions, right? There's going to be some of the biggest moments in the story are yet to come, and those are not going to be easy decisions. I think that's one thing that we can see as a pattern within the story, is people having hard choices to make and having to live with those choices afterwards. And the stakes are getting higher and higher as the supernatural elements grow along with them, and the things that can have a permanent impact on humanity or the whole continent or whatever. So yeah, I'm trying to think of another example of that where I really go against the grain on the fandom, but yeah, I'm not sure that I have a lot of big ones there. I definitely
No, I mean, I don't
think it's
think I
more
do
small
either.
things than big
Yeah.
things for me. Yeah.
I think my general take is that I think most of what the community has agreed on is pretty likely. I mean, that's not to say that George R. Martin won't completely take us off in a completely different direction, but I suspect not on the absolute central things. I suspect for me the kinds of things that I'm more wedded to, it's more that I've got some sort of working hypotheses that are that I think seem very likely, that I think most people would go, so yeah, that's a possibility rather than me. So, for example, I think Howland and Ashara being married and living in Greywater Watch, that for me, that I think is headcanon. That's unless and until we get something saying otherwise, that I think is very logical. I've also got my the statues and the crypts of Winterfell will come to life. Is that just feels so George R. R. Martin to me, and it's not based on. I mean, it's based on some evidence in the books. I'm sure I did a video on it ages ago, but for me, that's the kind of thing that I would put as more likely than I suspect most other people do. But yeah, it's an interesting one because I think now we've reached the point where the community has largely coalesced around a set of understandings of where we're going, and we now just need the next big jolt from George R. R. Martin to be showing us different things. Where we're wrong, and this, incidentally, this is why I try my very best not to be too harsh on theories that I would disagree with, because this is otherwise we just get into groupthink, and this is how we need to make sure that we're actually thinking as objectively as we can, is by being open to people with slightly different ideas.
Well said.
Right, let's go to let's do another Jamie question. This is from Lady Pushkins, saying, I see Jamie's dream by the weirwood, he fell asleep on a weirwood stump, as more of a dream full of emotions, for example, the feet in water imagery, rather than prophetic. They seem full of regret, guilt, and remorse about what has passed. Brienne seems to be the hope out of this, her offering for him to stand on her shoulders, etc. What do you think? How do you see the white blue light on their swords? Do you think he thinks a sword has always been the answer and the way out of things? This is a really interesting question because it's a really interesting little segment. It's a long vision, so I won't try and go through all of it, but just for those, in case you missed it, basically, the situation is, this is after he'd been at Harrenhal. He's had his hand chopped off. He's had this really kind of weird conversation with Roose Bolton, where Roose Bolton, with retrospect, is there just really concerned that he's starting to hatch a plan to come over onto Tywin's side, and now suddenly he's going to be sending him his own son with his hand chopped off, and Roose is really concerned about this. He sends him down south. They don't get very far before they stop the night, sleep. Jamie has this vision, which is, as I say, I'm not going to go into it in huge detail, but he's there in Casterly Rock, underneath Casterly Rock. He's, I think, naked. Then so his father and his sister and other Lannisters appear, and he says, "You know, where am I? This is your place. This is all that is here is doom." He gets a sword which glows this kind of silvery blue color. Brienne suddenly appears next to him. She also gets a sword of silvery blue. She's like saying, "What's danger is there going on here? Is there anything?" And then Rhaegar and the Kingsguard suddenly randomly turn up and start accusing him of breaking his oath. They start fighting, and then he wakes up. At which point, he then turns around and says, right, we're going back to Harrenhal. We're going to go get Brienne. So that's the context. And it's fair to say that there have been about as many interpretations of this dream or vision as there are people who've commented on it. But what's your sort of take on this dream?
Well, because when you run into something difficult like this, I think there is a lot of ways to look at it, like you said. But one thing I like to start with is what impact it has on the character. And like you said, I think the crucial thing is that it has Jaime turn around and go back to rescue Brienne. So I think what he gets out of it might be different than how we interpret it, but it's a good place to start. And what he gets out of it is, I need to be a knight, a real knight. And his idea of what a knight has changed in his mind. It's like some of his cynicism is shrugged off, and it's like some of it was in his hand. No, not really, but because he was cynical about knighthood. He was like, yeah, my most noble acts are the ones I'm maligned for. Like, I saved everybody when I killed Aerys, but everybody's like, no, that was the worst thing you ever did. And like you said, even stuff with Bran, he's like, well, he was saving his own family by doing that. It was, you don't just condone the murder of a child or the attempted murder of a child, but he didn't just do it because he likes hurting children. He did it to save other children. So, which is one of those like tough choice type things I was just talking about with my last answer to the last question there. So he thinks about Brienne and what she would do and how she embodies. He mocks her throughout this process, not in his dream, but leading up to that. But really, he's projecting, because she has all the qualities of what a knight should be, and qualities that he came up believing in, but along the way became disillusioned. He saw too many things, that he got involved in politics, not on his own choice, but from a very early age, he was a pawn between his father and the king in terms of their private feud, and was named to the Kingsguard because it was his sister's idea to join the Kingsguard so they could be together, and that backfired horribly in a number of ways. And so you can understand why he's disillusioned. George does a great job of filling in that backstory and explaining to us why Jaime is this started off on a path that's pretty similar to Brienne's in terms of what they thought knighthood was. Obviously, their opportunity and was massively different, though their prowess maybe isn't so different. And he's finally like met the one person that can show him, he's got all the advantages, or had them before he lost his hand. He's got all these advantages, and he became disillusioned with knighthood. She's had way worse things happen to her, way fewer opportunities, and she has not lost her sense of what knighthood should be. And that just kind of shames him. It kind of turns a light on in his head. Is like, even without my hand, I can be a really powerful knight because of his name, because of who he is. He's Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. He's a Lannister. He's a member of the royal family. He has a lot of power, even without his sword hand. And that's part of what he starts to realize. And it's his first action without a hand is he's like, oh, I don't need my hand to save Brienne. I can just jump in the bear pit and use my Lannisterness. And they'll be like, no, we can't let him die. Like he just uses himself. He just puts himself in the line of danger, and everybody just jumps too because he's Jaime Lannister. And he never thought to use himself like that. And, to put he's put himself at risk before, but not for the right reasons. He put himself at risk before because he's brave, naturally brave, and likes to fight and is really good at it. But he never did it because of honor or nobility, or was like, I'm saving people's lives. He just did it because he wanted to win, or because his father told him to. And that's all something he's reprocessing in his mind. I think that dream is a big part of that. That dream is like, you could call it processing. He was analyzing himself and kind of having a turn within his own mind, a shift of attitude, something that had been building for a while and finally, hit that platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of those things where you can interpret this on a couple of levels. I think there is definitely some kind of prophetic element to this. The fact that bears are there, Brienne is like seemingly afraid of bears, and then he goes back up and finds her in a bear pit fighting a bear. That's just too close to make you think that there's no element here. And this is a weirwood tree stump that he is on. He only discovers that afterwards. It's been there for quite a while. There's some lichen or something on the top of it. He has to kind of scrape off and go, oh, that's weirwood. I didn't realize that. So there is that element there.
He's also got a fever, and he's drank dream wine. So there's like a triple dream threat there, which is I love that touch, because it's like, well, is it all three? I guess it's all three, but really you can.
And he thinks of it as a fever dream. That's so from his perspective, that's what's going on. And I think what you're saying about this kind of like the psychological picking through of stuff, it feels very much like a dream. Is that he's being sort of abandoned by his family in this dream. However, they say, well, you've got everything that you need there. You've got this sword. Interestingly, the blue, why it's this kind of like silver blue, he's going to be given a sword in a bit by his dad, which is what happens here, which is made from ice, the sword ice, Ned Stark's sword ice. And what is ice? Kind of silvery blue. So I think that's again, there's a kind of a foreshadowing / prophetic element to that. The fact that he's there with Brienne, and the thing which comes through here is the oath keeper, oath breaker, which is a massive theme that goes through Jaime Lannister's kind of like life, as not just sort of his story arc here, but he's being accused by the people that he respected the most, basically his Kingsguard, when the classic Kingsguard Brotherhood, there, you didn't do what you should have done. So that's the kind of the setup, and he's working through processing this idea of all of his past and what then that means then for the future. And the immediate thing is the going back and getting Brienne, and then the thing after that is I'm naming this sword Oath Keeper, and I'm giving it to you. And that, I think, is the link. I think there's a deliberate link across from this dream to that moment when Tywin gives him a sword, and Tywin's the one who says there's a sword down there in this dream, and the sword is this echo, and Brienne is the person who is there keeping her oath on his behalf, almost as if he feels he can't do it yet himself, but he can half do it by trusting her. Mike Hanna in the chat, super chat, thank you very much, saying shout out to Ashaya. She's the best.
Shout out to Ashaya. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're not going to get disagreement here.
Certainly not.
So Jackie,
I have a question here from Maura if we want to take that one on.
Oh yeah, okay. Is that in the chat?
I have it here. Yeah, it's she's asking about the baby swap, the baby swap in the north, and what's going to happen to Gilly's son, who is left there in place of Mance's son as part of the swap, and what will Melisandre do when she finds out about it? Because of course Jon suspects that she would burn Mance's child. Now, do you think, for example, Robert, do you think Melisandre would have done that? You would have burned this child, or do you think that's Jon maybe just being extra cautious?
Well, I think that's Jon is being cautious, but we know that this is definitely Melisandre's go-to.
She's asking for the child, so yeah, I mean,
yes.
She wants it. Like, what other purpose could she have?
Exactly, and we've had this with Edric Storm already, so if she thinks that there's a thing which it is needed for, then yes, I think that's so. I think yes, it was Jon being uber safe, but I think he had a reason for it.
Yeah, he had a good reason. It's a dark thing to do, and it's amazing because he's reenacting the circumstances of his own birth, where he was maybe not baby swapped, but he was hidden with a family that he under changed circumstances, and they're going the reverse direction. I love that. Jon Snow was born in the south in Dorne and went north, and Ned pretended he was his child. Presuming all that's true anyway, it's one of those examples of headcanon that we have a strong reason to believe is true, but technically isn't proven. And in this case, it's the opposite. The child is born in the far north and is going south to Old Town and is being paraded as with a parent that isn't his. And
yeah,
a lot of really neat parallels there that John isn't even aware of, and none of them are aware of. Only readers, and not even all the readers, because they might not pick up on that. It's not like it's explicitly stated by some non-existent narrator, right? We don't have one of those. So I think it's super interesting. I do wonder how Melisandre will react, but I imagine she will react kind of the way she always does, which is she doesn't seem to really have she doesn't really get mad or sad, or she's always kind of even keeled. She's always in that sort of zealot mindset where whatever happens, we just gotta deal with it, or that's for Lord's will, or whatever she says. So yeah, I think it's one of the more interesting under the radar plots because there's so much going on at the Wall. I mean, just at the end of A Dance with Dragons, or just at the end of this book, with Jon getting elected Lord Commander, with Ygritte dying, with Mance being captured, with the kickoff of plots that we at this point aren't aware where they're going, but we do know what does happen, right? Like with the Stannis bringing everybody through the Wall, recruiting everybody, with Jon refusing Winterfell, which happens in this book. And that's a really big moment in terms of his identity. So I have no idea what's going to happen with Mance's son in staying by, or with Gilly's son staying behind in the north. I think he's probably going to be fine because, as Jon says, there's just no reason to kill him. There's no reason to burn that baby. He's nobody to her. So I think he did save that child, but then the child in the south is probably going to be Sam's going to pretend it's his with Gilly, and we might see some roughly what happened on the TV show with that end of the plot line where he just pretends it's his, and the family kind of is like, okay, cool, we'll accept him.
Yeah,
he's your bastard. Good job, Sam. But there could be more to that as well. I mean, the show obviously didn't have the breadth to expand on a lot of these plot lines, to put it mildly.
Yes, I mean, actually, there was one thing in there you sort of mentioned, sort of in passing, that it struck me going back to, I can't remember who it was, Diego Godoy perhaps was asking about what sort of surprised you or something on the reread. This was something that, again, I had logged in my head, but that it hit me anew. With Jon being offered, as Stannis comes and basically he offers Jon, I will legitimize you. I will give you Winterfell. You can be Lord of Winterfell. And Jon does think about this. He actively does. It's not just like a quick answer of, no, he does actually think, this has been a thing that he's been thinking about because he's so worked up inside himself about being a bastard, and that he always had these thoughts about possibly inheriting, and now he wouldn't have that kind of like bastard approach to him. And the big thing which actually gets him to the mindset of I don't think I'm going to do this is that Melisandre is very much alongside, sort of talking over Stannis' sort of shoulder, saying, and of course, we'll go in there and we'll have to chop down and burn that weirwood tree.
He's like, wait, no, I can't do that clause. Yeah.
Exactly. and it was Jon, that was the thing. It wasn't so much that, I couldn't possibly do that, I don't want to do it or anything. It was the fact that he thought, but Winterfell's, that doesn't belong to me. That's not my decision. This is Ned Stark's Winterfell. This is Robb Stark.
Yeah.
And it would be dishonoring to them and to their gods to do that. And that is actually the big moral point really for him as to why he didn't do it.
That's a great point. And I think one other thing I could add that I just thought of or meant to add before and forgot is that this also maybe the taking away of the child, the baby swapping and all that, which of course the actual swap comes not in A Storm of Swords, but that plot line begins here, is that it might be how the needle is moved towards Shireen as the eventual. Because if he didn't, because he obviously wouldn't have burned. If he has Shireen and Edric Storm, he's burning Edric Storm. If he has Shireen and Mance's baby, he's burning Mance's baby. But if all he has is Shireen, or all she has is Shireen, meaning Melisandre, depending on who actually makes the call, or if it's both of them, or I'm not sure, then then Jon might also be like, well, I just saved one child, so this one could be killed instead. Like, what did that really accomplish? And all sorts of moral conundrums will come up on such a thing. And it's going to be unpleasant. The burning of Shireen.
It is. And I mean, and just as a complete by the by, if you just think they're not all there now, but if you actually think about the amount of King's Blood that was randomly there at Castle Black, you've got Stannis himself was there, and Shireen, Jon is there, Maester Aemon. He was offered the kingship at one point. There are so many people there who have this potential King's Blood that you just have to go, well, if they've all gone, who's left? If she decides that is definitely what is needed, which I think she probably will. I mean, I'll just give a very quick shout out to my own random thinking about how what might happen with Jon Snow and his body is that if they're going to be doing a burning, then that's which is if they're going to burn Shireen, for example, that might be the point at which they decide to burn Jon Snow's body, which very probably will have been frozen in the ice cells, so they will need to melt it out before it can be burned. So his body will get thawed, and then we're just going to have, at the same time that Shireen dies screaming, he is going to suddenly jolt back into his own body and come out of the flames. That would be quite, as I say, I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen, but that would be quite the moment. If you could just imagine Melisandre's face when she suddenly sees Jon come back through the flames as she's sacrificing something to her god, Shireen to her god. That would be.
This touches so well on an earlier question too about how we kind of know this is going to happen. Yeah, maybe headcanon, maybe we're wrong, and Shireen's not going to get burned by Stannis. We've kind of accepted that, not just because we saw it on the TV. I think most of us expected it to happen before we saw it on the TV show. The TV show was more like a validation of something we already believed would happen rather than a confirmation. But see it how you want. I think it's a good example because like you said, there's a lot of theories on how it's going to happen, who's going to be there, what effect it may or may not have, what POV we'll see it through. Like, that alone is interesting. I personally think there's a good chance it'll be like Asha or something like that. But what Patchface will do, I mean, there's so many moving parts here, which is what makes it super interesting. Like, we don't even know when like you and I don't even know if Stannis will be the one to suggest it or accept it or even be there when it happens. Like maybe Melisandre just does it on her own. So, and like you said, Jon could be there, could wake up as part of it. He could. There's so many permutations and possibilities just for this one major event that,
I mean, my guess, personally, if I had to guess, I think we will see it from Melisandre's POV.
Could be hers,
He's created her as a POV character because, and this is one of the things that he tends to do, is if other POV characters are not going to be in a place, but he still wants to tell the story of what happens in that place, he creates a POV character for it, like Sir Barristan, for example.
Yeah.
When Dany's going to head off away from Meereen, but he still wants to show us what's there, he then creates him as a POV character. And I think he created Melisandre as a POV character in the last book, so that we can then see things that are happening in the wall in the absence of Davos.
No Jon, no Davos.
Exactly. So I think that's personally, I think that's where we go. But for those who are wondering, there's a new twist, I think, and it's a very slow twist, but it's definitely there, which is that when we say things like this, Shireen is something, it was on the show, we're pretty sure it's going to happen in the books. That's because this is one of those things that the showrunners said specifically came from George R.R. Martin. They talked about there being 3 WTF moments when George R.R. Martin had his big handover meeting, and this was one of them. The other 2, incidentally, being Hodor and King Bran, but this one was one of them. And so we've now baked all this into our all of our plans and thinking this is definitely going to be happening. But we have to, I think, at some point accept the fact that was George R. R. Martin doing a handover meeting. How many years ago now?
Many.
10? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't
At
even
least
know.
10, yeah. I think
Yeah, it
10,
was
more than 10.
between seasons 4 and 5, and he does change his mind on stuff. And so if he written that book and published it straight away, then yeah, I would have said 100%. I now think that it's very probably still going to be there, but maybe it's come down a notch because he has been rethinking and replanning things, and we shouldn't just naturally assume that that's what's going to be going on. Just because that was what his plan was at the time. Pierre Davis saying, how do you rank Oberyn amongst non-POV characters? I mean, I don't know what you mean by ranking. I think he's a great character. If that's
he's the
what
reddest
you mean.
viper there is.
Absolutely. He burns brightly, but not for very long. But I think that his impact is going to be felt, and this is just a thing which George R. R. Martin has said about the Winds of Winter, incidentally, is that we're going to be seeing a lot of his children in the Winds of Winter. So they will be out for revenge. He was, just by way of background, in case you're interested, he wanted revenge straight away for Elia, his sister, who was killed during Robert's rebellion. He tried to raise an army in Dawn to just go and attack straight away, and basically had to be talked down by Doran. And Doran said, "We will get our revenge. It's just going to take a little while longer than you're wanting." And he held him back, and he held him back, and he held him back until the moment that we see in this book, when he suddenly arrives and he is there with 15 years of pent up anger at the Lannisters, and that is the character that we see there. And when he has gone, the Martell anger at the Lannisters goes up yet another notch.
Oh yeah.
They already hate them for what happened with Elia and Elia's children, and Lewin Martell as well. But also now Oberyn's gone, and his kids are going to King's Landing. So that's a thing to keep an eye out for. And they are masters of poison and assassination. So
can I add something real
yes.
quick here? I wanted to take this opportunity because I need 5 minutes to run to the restroom, but I'm going to, when I come back, I'm not going to have this cloak on because it's too warm. But I know a couple people have commented on it, so I wanted to tell people where it came from. People have said, yeah, it looks like a Night's Watch cloak. It is, in fact, a Night's Watch cloak, and I got it in Ireland at a castle tour of the Winterfell, the castle that they use for Winterfell, and George R. R. Martin was there, so they just gave everybody who was there got a free Night's Watch cloak as part of the tour, and of course I've kept it as a keepsake ever since, and it is very effective. I wore it to a convention in Washington D.C. last month, where it was unusually cold, and I brought it with me to, had some cosplays there. I didn't intend on using it, but I thought maybe I'll use it. It was so cold, and I wore this thing. It did its job. So let me tell you, when those Night's Watchmen are still cold, despite one of these cloaks, that really tells you something, because these things are warm. All right, folks, I'll be right back, Robert.
Awesome, not a problem at all. While Aziz is going, I will just very briefly do my my usual couple of thank yous, which I try and do every live stream. Firstly, patrons. I hugely appreciate your support. Thank you so much. If you would like to support this channel, the best way to do that is through Patreon. There should be a link down in the description. Secondly, moderators, I've already said, asked for some mod love. They do a fantastic job. Moderators, thank you. I hugely appreciate it. While you're here, though, while Aziz is gone, really do go and check out History of Westeros. It's excellent. It's available not just as a YouTube channel, link again just down there, but also a very long-running and highly regarded, because it's excellent podcast. So please do go and check that out and see if we can give them a few extra follows and subscriptions. But let's get on with, I think I've had some more questions in the chat. Pierre Davis saying, John will stay dead and truly become Ghost. Well, yeah, this is the working theory that I, and I suspect quite a few other people have, is that John does get killed, but he skin changes wargs into Ghost. So he survives inside Ghost until such time as he can be brought back in, or he can go back into his body when his body is defrosted or whatever needs to happen to it. We get we get a bit of foreshadowing on this in the Dance with Dragons prologue. Pardon me, Varamir Sixskins. He is thinking, what does he do when he dies? Where can he go? Can he then skin change into something else? And the answer is yes. And so we see that George R. R. Martin sets that up in the prologue as a thing for us to be thinking right at the end of that story. That's how he quite often uses prologues. Stringer Studios saying, Shay must have tricked me. I thought she truly liked Tyrion. Was it all just for the gold? Also, Tywin seems to hate whores, but yet he and Shay. Yes, so I do have, I think I've got another question about this from one of my patrons. Let's see whether I can quickly find this one. Maybe I can't, but Shay, oh yeah, Commander Ray, Tyrion's murder of Shay is very dark, and while I'm sure the discussion will discuss how it affects Tyrion, I'm more interested in Shay and how perhaps she might be less gold hungry or just a frightened girl. I posit perhaps she did care about Tyrion. We literally just learned that Tisha loved him. What if she was trying to save Tyrion as much as herself? Now, this is an interesting one, because this is something George R. R. Martin himself sort of has opined on. He's back in the days when he would be telling us this kind of thing. He was talking about the TV show character Shay and the difference to the book Shay, and this is something occasionally he comes out and says, actually, he did in House of the Dragon with King Viserys. He says, actually, I prefer the version on the TV show than the version in my books. He thought that Paddy Considine, and I agree with him, did a fantastic job bringing an extra level of depth to that character that was not there on the page. And he says very similar things about Shay, or he said them when the main Game of Thrones TV show was on. This is what he said about the book version of Shay. He says, Shay is a camp follower. She has no real affection for Tyrion. He's just a John in the books. Her persona is very much a sex kitten, I guess. She likes the money, she likes the status, and yes, she doesn't care that much that he's getting married, because she's figured he'll still come into her bed and still keep giving her jewels and dresses and mansions and all of the other things he's giving her. So that's what he says about Shay in the books. But then on the TV show, he says, this Shay actually has genuine feelings for Tyrion, which gives a whole different dynamic to the scenes. So this is basically where we're at with Shay, is that book Shay, George R. R. Martin has basically confirmed that, yeah, she didn't care about him. She was exactly what Tyrion feared, but on the TV show, he thought that there was an extra layer going on there, that she did actually care for him. And I think basically we're now in a position where we have to say, well, which is worse, which from Tyrion's perspective, the fact that she did care about him, or the fact that she didn't care about him. Corvus Art saying, whites in Game of Thrones pass through the wall, but cold hands can't go through the black gate. Is it the gate or cold hands that is different? It has future implications. Yeah, it does have future implications. So it's the wall is the issue here, as far as we can tell. The wall is, although we think of it as being this huge physical barrier, actually the barrier is a magical barrier that then had a physical barrier built on top of it. And when it started, incidentally, the wall was normally a sort of initially kind of like a normal height wall, and then it just got added to and added to and added to, generation after generation, century after century, millennium after millennium. The Night's Watch just added to it over time. So the real issue is the magical barrier that's there. Now, incidentally, there appears to be whatever magic this is. We're told that the magic was probably from the Children of the Forest. That seems to be the same kind of magic as outside Bloodraven's cave north of the wall. Cold Hands can't enter there, and we're told that he can't cross the wall. So this seems to be presumably against the others, to prevent the others from coming through. The whites, we don't know. George R. R. Martin has not yet given us all of the detail about exactly how this magical barrier works, but it's possible that they came through because they were carried through. They did not personally, of their own volition, go through. They were carried through. Or it might be that whites can get away with it. Whites can cross over, but the others can't. We don't know that, but it's the barrier is the thing. It's not the gate. It's the barrier that's the wall itself that's the issue. I'll just flick through. I think I had another Music is Life saying, new author. You got me started, Robert. Thank you. Oh, that if I inspired you, and this is your first super chat. Well, thank you to start with. But if I inspired you to write, then that is amazing. That means a lot to me. So thank you. Have I got another question? Andrew K saying that's the game changer with John. It's going to be a unique resurrection any way we look at it. A skin changer spirit in a wolf soul jar at a magical hinge of the world. Yeah, absolutely. One thing that's another couple of things just about the wall and magic is, first of all, Melisandre says that her magic is extra powerful there. So it sort of makes magic more powerful in some kind of way. And the second thing is it does seem to have some kind of a barrier to sensing stuff. At least John couldn't sense Ghost. When he was on one side of the wall and Ghost was on the other, he could not sense him. So that implies that it's not just about dead things, however it is. There is a magical element to it. Also hinted at when Queen Alysanne, we read in Fire and Blood, Queen Alysanne cannot fly her dragon over the wall. Some have speculated maybe that's because it just didn't want to go near the others. To me, I think the much more likely thing here is that it's just there was a magical barrier preventing it from flying over. Okay, let's go to some more questions from my patrons. Catherine Furseth saying, hi, Robert and Aziz. Melisandre and her beliefs are more elaborated on in A Storm of Swords. She talks about the Great Other and seems to strongly suggest a connection between this dark god and the others. The religion of R'hllor originates in Essos, but Melisandre seems to have no problem converting her religious beliefs and truths to a Westerosi context. Does her religion incorporate a belief that it has the capacity and mission to save the whole world from the Great Other, not just Essos? What does this actually tell us about her motivation for being in Westeros in the first place? Did she come specifically to find Stannis? Why not stay in Essos and fight if the Long Night is actually a worldwide catastrophic event? Right. Did she come across because of Stannis? Yes, we're told that she did. She saw this in the flames in some way. More broadly, though, her faith, her religion, it's all encompassing. It's not just an SOZ religion. Yes, it's more there, and it sort of comes out from Essos, but she and they see this as a religion for the whole world. Indeed, although we don't actually think about it all much or hear about it all that much, there are red priests and temples in the Seven Kingdoms, small ones, in a few of the big ports like Old Town, King's Landing. Obviously, we had Thoros went over to King's Landing, but it's not that the red priests have made a decision not to come to Westeros. They have, it just hasn't, because there are religions already in Westeros. Then that's why it wasn't sort of picked up so much by the people of Westeros. But in terms of the why not just stay in Essos and fight, I think there is although yes, the Long Night was a worldwide catastrophic event, and the presumption is that the second worldwide catastrophic event of the Long Night would similarly affect everywhere. She will have obviously seen, where did the others come from? And the others come from the far north. She was aware of the prince that was promised prophecy, which is linked, as we know, to the Song of Ice and Fire, and that is talking about the winds coming out from the north, the winter coming from the north. This is why the wall was built. This is the sensible idea for where we might see the others come from. And yes, she sees, just in terms of how the religious aspect of this is, she sees there being two gods in the world. It's this, is it Manichaean, when you get two different opposing gods, one good, one evil. Hers, the red god, is the good god, and then the great other is the manifestation of evil, and the great other is the god of the others. We've got a question from I've got ahead of myself slightly on this one. Yes, Colt Foster. When Jon is sent to assassinate Mance and Stannis' army interrupts Jon, he observes a banner with a seahorse on it. Is this House Velaryon in a secret alliance with Stannis, or George making a mistake by putting it into the book? It is House Velaryon. It's not a mistake. This is deliberate from George R. R. Martin. House Velaryon, it has to be said, by the time of A Song of Ice and Fire, has fallen hugely from the heights that we see them at in House of the Dragon, the Dance of the Dragons. They were obviously the close allies to the Targaryens. The Targaryens have been swept out. In Robert's Rebellion, the Targaryens were swept out from Westeros, and so that has all gone. House Velaryon were not. They still stayed there. They stayed on Driftmark. However, their power and influence is down. And Stannis was given Dragonstone to rule. And with that came some lands, islands particularly around, that owed their fealty to Dragonstone, and Driftmark was one of them. So yes, technically in A Song of Ice and Fire, House of Velaryon are Team Stannis. Now that doesn't mean all of them are. Ordain Waters is probably the most charismatic and interesting of the Velaryons, and he at least appears to at some point be there supporting the Lannisters. But House Velaryon itself is part of Team Stannis. Welcome back, Aziz.
Or hi, rather.
Hi. Excellent. I was just talking very briefly about House Velaryon, who fallen from grace since the time of the Dance of the Dragons, but in this, yes, they were they're Team Stannis of sorts. It has to be said, because Jon does see a seahorse when he's banner north of the wall. Let's dig into another question here. Commander Ray, this is another Jaime question. Jaime shaves his head in the beginning of the book, giving a clear parallel to Egg. Do you think Martin did this intentionally? And what might this inform us about Jaime and his character arc in this book and going forward? Brienne in this being Dunk in that analogy. Well, I think that's really interesting. I'd love your thoughts on whether there is a Dunk and Egg thing going on there. But when reading this, I went back to remind myself of this. But at the very beginning, the first Jaime chapter we have, which incidentally is the first chapter of the book, we have the prologue, and then we go straight into Jaime. So the first words of the book as a whole from Jaime's, the first time we actually see into his mind, are this: an east wind blew through his tangled hair, as soft and fragrant as Cersei's fingers. And that's the first sentence we get. And so then a little bit later, he decides he's going to cut off his hair because everybody knows what he looks like, and so it'll be easier for him to hide. But this is the starting point for the character. Is there he is. He's got his Lannister hair, and he's thinking back to how nice it was when Cersei used to run her fingers through his hair. So that's starting off on his character arc. But do you see any kind of Dunk and Egg vibes going? I mean, Brienne, obviously, we basically know she is a descendant of Dunk, so that's there. Do you think there's a Dunk and Egg vibe to the two of them?
Yeah, absolutely. There is, not in the same way, maybe not Dunk and Egg, like one of them is the child and then one of them is the big person. Although, for one thing, there's some strong circumstantial evidence that Brienne is the ancestor, or descendant rather, of Dunk.
Yeah.
And thematically, it's very connected. The head shaving might just be more of a clue rather than a true parallel, because it's really Dunk that Jaime this is all more related to. The shaving your head to stay concealed is more like Egg, but otherwise his story isn't that similar, I think. In that, what we talked about earlier is Jaime's story. A lot of Jaime's story is learning, becoming disillusioned with knighthood, regaining his sense of purpose and his love of knighthood in the first place. And Dunk is a true knight. That's what the Hedge Knight is about. This the one story that would have been written at this point. The Sworn Sword wouldn't have been written, was written 5 years after A Storm of Swords, and then Mystery Knight written 10 years after, or 11 years after. So it's really all just the Hedge Knight at this point, and whatever George had conceived of for Dunk, which a lot of which would have been in that first story. So yeah, it's about knighthood and being a true knight and all that, and that's what Jaime's story is. And it's shaving his head is maybe symbolic of his beginning towards that. It's very symbolic in general to shave your head, because it's how you're born into this world. You're born with no hair. It's like going back to the beginning, and it's associated with a lot of real world joining. Like if you're joining a cult or a religion, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Or if you're perhaps joining like the military, even you're going through basic training, or if you're going to, even I think some police academies do this, you shave your head as like a reset. Because it changes how you feel about yourself. You feel different, and that's feeling different than you had for a long time. So, changes your mind state a little bit. You feel different, and then go from there. They do lots of other things that are much more notable and important, like training you and teaching you and all this other stuff. But it's part of that initiation, part of that joining. So I think that's maybe what's being used here for Jaime and his the beginning of his quest towards becoming a knight more like Brienne or Dunk. And but also he has to hide who he is, like Egg. So yeah, that's a pretty good catch. Maybe the answer didn't quite go the way the person asking expected, but I think it got us onto a good discussion there. I really like that.
Absolutely, yeah. So I mean, I think I would agree completely. This is a breaking down of who Jamie thinks he is. We start off his hair, then he loses his hand, then he loses. He's in the Kingsguard, but he doesn't know half of the other people in the Kingsguard who he's not been gone long, but they've all been replaced. And what's going on with Cersei's change. So it's bit by bit through this. He's losing things, but he's starting to try to work out what actually matters. And so, yeah, this
tearing himself down, building himself back up. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Great.
Sarah O'Connor, fine art. Hi there, Sarah. Great to see you. Saying thanks, gentlemen. Great live. If Jon can jump into Ghost, are skin changers possibly immortal unless killed? Well, this is one of those things that I mentioned a moment ago. The Varamir Sixskins prologue that we have, which kind of like tease up a lot of these ideas. One of the things that Varamir is there telling us about how skin changing works, because he's six skins. He's got all of these animals that he can walk into. But we haven't, all of the Stark kids haven't been having any training, so they don't know any of these basic things. And so we learn a huge amount. One of the things that we learn is that, yes, you can, if your body dies, you can then go into your skin changed animal. But slowly over time, you will become... I can't remember the exact wording here. Maybe you can, as the sort of subsumed within it. It will start to sort of take over your characteristics, and so you will, you will still be there, but it's less so. Which has a really interesting thing, and I keep on trying to understand how this might work. We don't know how long. If our assumption is right, that Jon, he gets stabbed, his body dies, he skin changes, walks into Ghost, he stays in Ghost for a while, then he comes back into his body. That's the working assumption most of us have got. Exactly how that works, we don't know the details, but that's the working assumption. What we've been told by Varamir Sixskins is that during that time, and he could be in there for quite a while, he will start to become more wolfish. It's probably the only way of saying it. And so you have to then ask, when he comes back into his own body, does this mean we're going to have a changed Jon? Is he going to be more wolfish and more like Ghost? And if so, what does that mean? How is that going to impact on his character? I mean, Ghost is quiet. Does this mean
he's never going to talk?
Exactly. Is he? But is Ghost a lone wolf, but also part of a pack? How is that going to start working? Is he going to become more ruthless? I don't know. I mean, what's your thoughts on this, Aziz?
Yeah, honestly, that's a really good question, because I've thought about how he's going to come back because has been dead, and we've got characters like Lady Stoneheart and Beric Dondarrion to kind of play with, or at least consider, to get an idea what Jon might be like. Of course, it won't be the same, because it's rooted in who they were with some alterations, and so we got to start with who Jon is and then go from there. But at least Beric is somewhat similar in some ways, because he's a leader of sort of a disparate group of societal outcasts, and he even has a black cloak, and kind of has a lot of parallels to Bloodraven, who of course was a Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. So the idea of him being wolfish, I never thought of him being silent. I was laughing about that just a minute ago, and that never really occurred to me. Like, yeah, Ghost is quiet. Ghost is also very watchful. Ghost was also, they say he's sent by the old gods because of his coloring. He has that kind of added vibe surrounding him, I guess you could say. But he's also followed Jon beyond the wall. He's been attacked by an eagle. He's fought Core and a Half Hand when it came down to that. And yeah, he's a wolf. I mean, he's an animal. You know, if he's John's gonna be more like that, it's fitting with some of the other characters. If Danny is gonna be more like a dragon, and Bran's gonna be more like, I don't know, a lot of animals.
I've got
Arya's
the
gonna
quote.
be cat.
Yeah, I've got the quote here actually.
Oh,
It's
good.
when the man's flesh dies, his spirit lives on inside the beast. But every day his memory fades, and the beast becomes a little less a warg, a little more a wolf, until nothing of the man is left, and only the beast remains. So that's it's suitably vague. But the kind of the feel is definitely there. Is that he's going to become less himself and more wolfish, and I think that was really interesting what you were saying. Sorry, I sort of interrupted you there, but other characters are. Danny is going to be more dragonish. So what does that mean? And are other characters going to become more like particular animals? We'll have to wait and see, I guess.
Yeah, that's so fitting because so many characters have animal like their sigils, their houses. It's so well set up for that sort of symbolism.
Yes. Yeah. Reflective rambling. Hi there. Picking up a question for Luna Cascade. Thank you. I love it when people do that. Saying, why didn't other priestesses of R'hllor come with Mel to Westeros? I mean, the short answer on this one is that she's a rogue priestess. We tend to, probably because of the TV show as much as anything else, when she was the red priest, the red woman, we kind of thought, oh, well, she is like a representative of the religion. She's not. She went rogue. It was her who decided to go over and try and find Stannis. She didn't. When you think about it, we never actually see her report back to the temple or even think about it. It's like she's just going off and doing her own thing. This compares to Thoros, who he was sent by the church hierarchy to go to King's Landing. To they saw a king over in King's Landing who was getting a little bit focused in on the fire stuff, and they thought, oh, the red priests, we're good on the fire. Maybe we can turn him. But Melisandre, she went on her own, and as far as we can tell, there is no contact whatsoever between her and the church hierarchy. Let's go. Oh, Jenny of Oldstone's actually interesting in the chat, saying, I think Jon Snow hesitated taking Winterfell and being recognized from status, but when he finds out that Robb has recognized him, made him Lord of Winterfell, will he take it from his brother? Yeah, we've got a question about the Robb's will in a little bit, so I'll hold on to that thought. We will come back to that one in just a moment. Charis Ballerina, although connected to this, Charis Ballerina is saying, do Jon's thoughts and desires about being Lord of Winterfell prove that Cat had a point? Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? So Cat, there's this conversation. Let's get onto the will and that business now. I'll try and find the question from one of my patrons, and we'll try and tie all this together. So we did a video on this, actually, the two of us, which went out on the channel. I can't remember when it was, probably a couple of months or so ago now, about Robb Stark's will. But there's this, the moment is quite clear and understandable, is that he's married this woman, but she's not pregnant, and he's headed off, and there's going to be another war coming. He's already thought, I'm going to have to go and try and take Moat Cailin, so he's already thinking ahead. There's going to be more battles happening. He's just had a big injury. He's got to start thinking about that succession. But who does he say is going to be king after him? He thinks that Bran's dead. He thinks that Rickon is dead. He thinks that Sansa's gone missing. Arya's gone missing. Sansa has just married the Lannisters, so nobody would want her to be taking over. So who? And he decides he wants Jon, and he wants to legitimize Jon, and then say that Jon is his heir until he has children of his own. And Kat just comes out with this whole series of arguments. Why not? I'm always amused by her saying, "Oh, you have got other relatives. Don't forget, there was like your grandfather's father had a second cousin who had 3 daughters, one of whom married." And then she just goes off on this, and she loses track of exactly who it is that she might be thinking could be the next king. But one of the arguments that she comes out with is that bastard-born children, if you legitimize them, they will always be a problem. They will always want to be coming, even though you might trust them right now. Yeah, then there's going to maybe their children after them. They would be challenging you for it. Think back to Daemon Blackfire, the Blackfire rebellions that caused no end of problems. When Jon does get offered Winterfell, we do see him kind of reflect that he has thought about this. He has thought about how he probably would quite like to be Lord of Winterfell, but he knew he couldn't. Does that mean, it's a really good question, I should put it to you, Aziz, does that mean that she had a point, Catelyn had a point?
I'd say no, not really, because again, it comes down to who else are you going to name? Like, again, it comes down to this one cousin in the Vale, someone who's not a Northerner, someone who wasn't raised at Winterfell, doesn't know the place. Yeah, I think that's she would have a point. Like she brings up the Blackfire rebellions, and that's not fair because the Blackfires existed when there was lots of other Targaryens. They were stealing it from an existing family. But in this case, there is Rob's point is all my brothers and sisters are off. There is nobody else. Who else can I give it to? There's no other Stark to pass it to. So it's not like I'm picking Jon over everybody else. It's that Jon's the only choice. So he's acknowledging the risks, but saying we just don't have another choice. And Catelyn is I don't think Catelyn was being very fair there and saying that, well, she doesn't really acknowledge that part of the argument. She's like, she just doesn't want it to be Jon. She's kind of sticks her heels in and is like, well, anybody but Jon. But and Rob is like, well, that's not a very good argument, Mom.
and yeah, I mean, so I think I would go as far as to say that she has a point that Jon has been thinking about, how much he would like to be Lord of Winterfell. She is, for all her flaws, George R. R. Martin does write her as being clever and insightful. That's something which always comes across when you read her chapters. She notices stuff, she figures stuff out, maybe not always in time. She figures out the Red Wedding about 10 seconds before people start shooting arrows down at her. But she at least does. And she'd had her doubts all the way through on that. And so here she is right. She does have insight. She does know what a little bit of something going on in Jon's heart is. But overall, no, I don't think she did have a valid point there. As you say, I think Jon is the only realistic option, unless you then go to someone like Edmure. I think is the only other person that you could possibly say is part of the family, and people might bend the knee to. But with the Northerners, probably not.
You could argue that he passed the test with flying colors because she thinks he would maybe covet it, but he was offered it and refused. He didn't take it, so maybe like. It's true. That kind of backs Rob. I guess you could see it that way anyway.
Yes, yeah, and I think we can see Jon's heart more than she can, and we can see.
Fair. Yes,
yeah, he does. Although yes, he has this, as we all do. We're all human, and he has these dreams of like things that he knows he can never have. And when the opportunity came to him, as you say, he decided no, and actually out of respect for Kat's husband and son, as much as anything else. Reflective rambling. Pick up a question for Jenny of Oldstones. Thank you. Saying, has anyone ever considered that Shireen may die of her disease first, and they burn her body to stop the spread?
Yes, I have considered that.
In that case, Aziz, you feel free to talk some more.
All right, then. Thank you. The idea being that Grayscale has clearly been teased as a plot. It's already, John Connington has it, and it's brought up in more than one different region, like more than one different storyline. It has it popping up. And we have Val with her dire prediction that it doesn't go away, it only sleeps. And Val is like a very lighthearted person. She laughs in the face of danger. She jokes to Queen Salisa's face. She's just doesn't she's not a fearful person, but when the subject of Grayscale comes up, she agrees. She's like, this child is unclean. She almost is calling for her death right then and there. So that's one person who probably won't be against it. I mean, she might be against the burning parts, but she won't be against killing of Shireen probably, because she, from Val's perspective, this is a dangerous child who has the power, not consciously, but could kill many, many more people just if this disease wakes itself back up. So absolutely, it's been teased that this could matter, and this, if it's gonna wake up, then that's a very good reason to burn her. I mean, not a very good reason. It provides a better reason than some, vague prophecy that one person that no other Red Priest is even backing. But from afar, how's that going to look? It's still going to look like he burned her. It's still going to look like maybe some of the rumors about Dany, that Dany killed her own brother, or that Dany killed her own husband, or that she's... Yeah, there's all sorts of stories about Dany that aren't true because of the way the rumor mill works, especially towards women. It seems to be exacerbated, women in power. And that provides a reason Val would get behind something awful like that. Well, this is one of those rare cases where it's correct to kill a child because she's a threat to everyone because of her disease. You could see other people having that same attitude, saying, yes, look, for the good of the fact that she's a contagious disease that can literally wipe us all out, we should kill her. And then it's just, it's cruel to burn her when you could just end her life more ethically. But still, you could see that leap being made. But that's not something you'd say, oh, well, this theory doesn't work because they would never burn her when they could just cut. Of course that's a small hurdle to clear, I think, in terms of the narrative. So yeah, I could see that happening, or I could see these things being connected in some way or another. And again, it's like we were saying a minute ago, there's so many permutations of this plot line, and we didn't even mention the Grayscale as something. But yeah, it is something that could absolutely be attached. I mean, diseases are worse in winter, right? Everybody's huddled together and you have less food. Your immune system is weakened. Diseases spread more in winter. So yikes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely just in terms of the question, I think it's not that she's going to die from it and then they'll burn her body. It's that what they thought had stopped, because basically what happened was she got the Grayscale and then Stannis threw absolutely everything at it and it seemed to stop, and it hasn't done anything for the last few years. If it starts growing again, that's the point at which you might start getting this as a real option. And you have to look at the what's the balance of power currently at Castle Black. That's the thing, and it's quite complicated. But at a very high level, the Night's Watch are hugely down. Some of them will have just been killing Jon Snow, but they're up in arms. They won't have a leader. Let's not forget, they've just killed their Lord Commander, so there is no leader of the Night's Watch at this moment in time. We get a number of Stannis's troops, but most of them went off with Stannis. But the people around are mostly the Queen's men. These are fanatics of supporting Melisandre, and we've seen some of them wandering around with Stannis, and they've literally sort of come up to him and say, I think we should burn some people. It's been a while since we burnt anyone.
Yeah,
we should do that. Exactly. And that's the mindset you've got going on here. And then you get the wildlings, many of whom are there. And we know that at least one person who a lot of them hold in high regard, Vel, would be absolutely in favor of this.
Mm-hmm.
So the balance of power is actually probably in favor of it, just as it stands right now. And it shouldn't therefore, but it's not like we're not looking for a trigger. This is just if this is suggested, that's probably where people would go.
Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, just to add one more thing to it, like you said, you mentioned the free folk, you mentioned Val. They are John. When John is stabbed, he has just come from giving them the rah, let's go get the Bolton speech, or the speech that got them to side with him against the Boltons. So they're already ready for blood, and he was their leader too. And so you could see the Night's Watch and these free folk kind of turn on each other a bit, and which would just exacerbate the whole situation and possibly leave fewer people standing to stop this atrocity, or perhaps provide more narrative groundwork for it happening in the first place, because things will get more desperate.
Yes, exactly. And the final thing on that, I think, is just to add in why now on the TV show it seemed a little bit unnecessary because of the weather. It's bad weather that we're told, but they never really showed more than a foot of snow or something like that. It didn't look that bad.
It didn't look that bad, yeah.
But the situation we have currently outside Winterfell, so Stannis's troops are eating their horses at the moment. This is how bad it's got. You get Winterfell, it's got so cold that 6 of the 7 gates have frozen shut. They couldn't find just this as a random example. They could not find the entrance to the crypts which is a massive door, because of the snow was just drifted up against it, and nobody knew where it was. This is a bad winter already, and it's only going to get worse. And so we're going to reach the point where actually, if you get all these people at Castle Black wanting to head down and retake Winterfell, they simply can't. We're told that they at the moment in Castle Black they're going underground. They've got tunnels underground going from one bit to another because it's really hard to walk across the castle yard. Basically,
it's so bad. Yeah.
So actually, this idea of we need to do this for the weather is not just it'll make it a little bit easier for Stannis. This is just, if you want to do anything, we have to improve the weather.
Yeah, and it's like, should maybe modern meteorologists should adopt this terminology. It's like, it's really cold, it's a bad winter, but is it burn your daughter cold, or is it just
yes, I mean, let's not pretend. We should probably put the slight moral there. Personally, I'm against burning children alive.
Same.
Same.
State the obvious that I'm on team don't burn Shireen, but I'm also on team I fully expect it to happen anyway. My opinion will not be consulted.
Yeah. So we shouldn't be shocked by it. Yeah. Right. Let's go to a question from Stephen, saying, "Hi, Robert and Aziz. Hope all is well. Thank you. A Storm of Swords was apparently meant to end with a 5-year time skip, but George R. R. Martin eventually decided against this while writing the next book. Do you know what plot lines or story points were set up in the book that had to be changed or abandoned because of the change?" A really interesting question. I mean, I'll give we sort of touched on this a little bit earlier, but I'll just touch very briefly on the why he decided against it, which might then tee up. I think, Aziz, you're probably in a better position to sort of scope out a few of the things that maybe George R. R. Martin has said in the past about this. But basically, the idea was that he was going to do the books, these 3 books that we've had so far. They were as is, and then the next book was going to be 5 years later, but it would have this long prologue, sort of going back and saying what happened previously, and there would be like people remembering back to what happened when they get to their chapter, and they were remembering back to things that have happened over the last 5 years, and it would try and catch everyone back up to where they were. And George R. R. Martin basically started this, and he got a good way into this, like a year or so or something. Yeah. And then decided, first of all, he didn't like the whole always doing flashbacks to be telling the story. He wanted to actually be in the story to be telling it. And then secondly, he felt that whereas there are some characters that you could accept, okay, so Arya's just training to be an assassin for 5 years, fine, we can leave her there and just give her some highlights later. There is no way that Cersei would have just sort of sat down and not done anything for 5 years. And so he just felt that just was not feasible. So he then went back, and actually what we've got, these next 2 books, very broadly, Feast of Crows and A Dance with Dragons, very broadly are that bit of that 5 years. I mean, it's not exactly, but what he was planning on doing was to use the next book he wrote after this one, after A Storm of Swords. He was hoping that would be the one when Dany could be coming back to Westeros, which is roughly what we might think might be happening in The Winds of Winter. So this bit here, these 2 books we've got here, is actually that 5-year gap, but squished in and with lots of stuff going on. So that as the context, what had to be abandoned because of it? I'll throw this over to you, Aziz, if you know of any examples here.
Yeah, I'm surely going to forget a few because there are a lot of things that were abandoned, and I have, there's notes and places that I have some of this written down, but I don't have it in front of me. However, there is a lot. One of them is something we brought up earlier, which is the creation of the cadet branch of House Dane, because he originally planned on Edric Dane being 17 years old, probably was going to be Sword of the Morning, but 12-year-old being Sword of the Morning, 13-year-old, it's kind of hard to pull that off, so to speak, with the in that scenario. So he creates an adult Dane and also makes him kind of a bad guy. So this is he had some other ideas while we're at it, apparently, as the story grew in the telling, because I don't think he intended to have Edric Dane become a bad guy, or a villain or a villainous type, or someone who tries to also murder little girls like Marcella, Shireen. This is similar character. They're 12-year-old princesses basically, or something. So yeah, they're both have some awful facial wound. Anyway, another one would be, some of the storylines, like you said, there's not a big difference because Sansa could have just been learning from Littlefinger for a few years, and Theon just continues to rot in the dungeon like he did anyway. Arya becoming more of a faceless man. A lot of these were set up that way. Sam at the Citadel. There's plenty of things. Jon but Jon doing nothing as Lord Commander for a few years doesn't work that well. Like you said, some of the other ones, Cersei doesn't work very well. The reaction to the Red Viper's death is hard to get around without anything. And then there's a Greyjoy rebellion going on. Like, will we skipping that too? Or is that going to be all flashbacks? So there were a lot of casualties of the 5-year gap. Just go running through every plot line. You could see that a lot of them would have had issues. And that caused this condensing. And some of these issues are going to remain. Like, Arya's kind of young for some of the stuff that's happening to her. Like the Mercy chapter, it's a little sexual, and she's pretty young still. So which George intended for her to be an adult by then. So that's just kind of, oh well, what are you going to do? And Dany, same thing. Like, he intended for her to be older and Sansa to be older, but they're just not going to be. So he's still going to stretch some of this out. Winter will probably give him an ability to slow things down a little bit, because everything's going to have to move slower in winter, at least in some places. And you've got things like maybe the disease. Grayscale could maybe slow things down. It's hard to have big old battles and campaigns when, you don't want people getting close to each other. So, I know there's more than that. There's other, like I said, there's a lot of this has been documented, and George has talked about some of it specifically, but I can only go on what is coming to mind right now. But yeah, it's substantial. There's a lot of things. I feel like Brienne in general, her POV probably only exists because of the 5-year gap. So, or the scrapping of the 5-year gap. So we're very thankful in that regard. Like, we wouldn't have gotten Brienne POVs if not for the 5-year gap getting cut. So that's a really good thing. That might be one of the biggest things, because Brienne is not only a product of the 5-year gap getting cut, but she is the second biggest part of the book. She is the second most. She's got the second most chapters, second most minutes in A Feast for Crows. So substantial. And Jaime and Cersei, of course, get a lot of screen time as well. It's probably the reason we have Arianne. It's probably the reason we have, obviously Aris Oakheart and Ario Hota, which people probably don't consider those a big deal either way too much, but it's worth considering those other characters. So yeah, there's a lot of things you have to keep in mind, things that we wouldn't have and things that we do have instead. Like Brienne's one of the best examples of something that we have because of the 5-year gap being cut, and something that we would have instead of it would be, much more age appropriate characters and more adult character, whatever you want to say. But yeah, it's a really interesting what if. There's a whole lot to do with that. Yeah,
it is. I mean, I think the Ironborn is another element where we get a lot because of because we're not having a 5-year gap. Suddenly, we get we've got 2 Ironborn in addition to Theon as well. We get 2 Ironborn POVs, which I think probably got more going on with them than they would otherwise.
3 actually, right? Yeah, 3.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I always forget about Victarion. This is not long for the world. But I'm digressing, going off to Paul Victarion now. My brain shouldn't go there. But I think the big thing is, and it's the more boring bit of it, the idea of there's like abandoned storylines or new storylines that I think is fascinating. But the big thing is stuff like Jon, just to pick one random example, he was, for the end of this book, supposed to have been a character that had 5 years experience of being Lord Commander at the Wall. He was a trained, he'd been there, he'd lived a goodly period of his life just being in charge and people obeying his orders. He was used to it, and he probably got his structures sorted. That's not going to be the case. The Jon that we're going to be seeing in the last couple of books is actually going to be somebody who just got made Lord Commander, then got killed, and is now just going off and doing stuff. So he's not had that kind of basis of being in charge for a very long time, which should create a different dynamic for him and his story going forward. And I'm sure it will, but we will never know what it would have been like otherwise, I guess.
One thing that would have been maybe enhanced by the 5-year gap is just the weight behind the reunions. Like, Jon would have thought Arya dead for like 7 years, and to find she's alive after that long, instead of only like 2 or 3 years maybe, which is still a very long time. It's not going to not have a lot of weight to it. But wow, 7 years of thinking someone's dead, because it would be Arya and potentially Bran and Rickon too. Like, he might think all 3 of them were dead, and the same would go for each of the others, thinking that about some of the others as well, the other siblings. Not to mention other families with similar people.
And Lady, actually, the more you think about this, the more the deeper you go, because Lady Stoneheart, we still don't know huge amounts about all of her motivations other than the sort of the obvious ones, but she's clearly trying to find Arya. And that is clearly one of the things which is top of her list of priorities, because she thinks, and Arya was the person that she was trying to persuade Robb should be his heir, and Robb says, no, I think she's probably dead, and Lady Stoneheart said, no, I'm sure she's alive. If Arya does disappear for 5 years, how does that change what Lady Stoneheart's about?
Yeah, she just keeps looking for her because she knows. Yeah, like you said, she knows she's alive because Harwin would have told her. Harwin was there and saw Arya, and Harwin is one of Lady Stoneheart's men. And then there'd be other witnesses as well. Yeah, so.
Building on this, Stephen also asked about Edric Dane, who we've mentioned a couple of times. So Edric Dane, for those who kind of missed him, so he was squire to Beric Dondarrion, because Beric Dondarrion was engaged to Alyssa Dane. Perhaps I can't remember the name exactly, but a member of House Dane.
Illyria? I think Illyria Dane.
Illyria, yeah, I think you're probably right. So he was the squire, and he went with him into what became the Brotherhood Without Banners, and he is actually now Lord of House Dane. So although he's very young, he's actually Lord of House Dane, and he, in the books, he's now kind of separate. Brotherhood Without Banners, we still get Lady Stoneheart as like the rump of it, but then some seem not too convinced by this, and so he seems to be sort of like heading off. But the question is, given our working assumption that he was supposed to sort of go and grow up and then get the Sword Dawn, but then that bit's been given over to Gerald Dane Darkstar. Is there a role still for him? Might, and this is what Stephen says, would he have noticed the similarities between Lightbringer, as he's been there with the Sermons of Thoros, the similarities between Lightbringer and Dawn? So perhaps the original plan for the characters that he got into his head, that he was both the next Sword of the Morning and Azor Ahai reborn. What do you think is going to happen with him now? I think is the main question. If the taking of Dawn is taken by Darkstar, where's he going?
Well, he might be caught in the middle of that. Darkstar might have to get violent to take Dawn to be able to claim it. I doubt he can just waltz in and grab it, because I think you're right that Edric Dane has left the Brotherhood Without Banners, and several others have left with him, ones who didn't agree with Lady Stoneheart's leadership. Like Thoros of Myr says it to Brienne, that they were not, we're not about this. We justice. We used to be about that, but we're not we're not doing that anymore. And so, so several people left, including Anguy the Archer and some others. So they're with Edric now. But we don't know where they went. But a very good argument is they would just go, why not go back to his castle? That seems he's got a whole castle to go to. Why not go there? Where else would they go? And so that might be how they may be a off-screen plot line there, is kind of a shame that such an important thing would happen off screen. But I don't know who else we would get to witness it. Is it like a prologue thing or an epilogue thing? Maybe that would be one way to handle it, to manage the fact that a POV doesn't necessarily work for this. Somehow Ario Hota could be part of it, but that doesn't, because he is at least going to deal with Darkstar. But even that, like, how is he going to end up at Starfall? I don't know. It doesn't. Maybe he just captures Edric, holds him as a hostage. Maybe that's how this scenario is resolved, when Ario and Obara show up on Doran's orders to defeat Darkstar. He produces a hostage, the Lord of Starfall, something like that. I'm just kind of throwing out ideas here, but I really don't know. I think he might just not have much of a role now. He was never thrust upon us as a major character. He looked promising. But, if you want to be optimistic, George R. Martin himself said, if a 12-year-old is going to save the world, so be it. He didn't necessarily intend it that way, but if his story goes that way, so be it. He's not against young people doing big things. So the plan I'm very confident in saying the plan for Edric Dane changed. I'm only medium confident that it changed to nothing. I don't think it's nothing entirely. I think he's at least going to be wrapped up in the claiming of Dawn, because Dawn George didn't get rid of Dawn as a thing. He's too deep in there. There's no way we would have a minor riot if Dawn just was never used or touched in the whole story. So it seems like Edric will be involved in that somehow. It's hard to get deeper than that general prediction, though.
Yeah, and I do wonder whether he's going to be the information giver. Because we've got a few of these. We've got Howland Reed. We know George R. Martin said he is going to appear, but he knows too much. So at some point, he's going to turn up and tell us about all the background to stuff. We've possibly got Benjen. Maybe he might reappear. Who knows? If so, he will probably tell us a whole load of stuff. Somebody somewhere along the line, I would have thought, would give us some background to House Dane and this sword. And who is going to do that? Well, he's young, but he's the Lord, and he will have presumably at some point have been told some of these legends. he will know the house words, that kind of thing. And so maybe through him somehow, this is how we're going to learn the significance of Dawn as a sword. And maybe what Darkstar is just thinking, oh, this is a really cool sword and I want it and I want the job title. But we're being told by Edric what this actually is about. So maybe that's what the role is.
If one more thing I had to add to that is I think that there's that because they're trying to cast, I mean, they meaning Varys and John Connington and Illyrio young Aegon as the son of Rhaegar, which I think you and I probably agree that he's not. But setting the truth of that aside is irrelevant for this particular point. If they're really trying to call to mind Rhaegar, what would look better than the son of Rhaegar with a Dane wielding Dawn at his side, just like Rhaegar had? Arthur Dane was best friends with this. Like, this is going to be like the pair of them born again. I mean, of course they aren't because of who Gerald Dane really is, but from a distance, as far as like a marketing perspective, it would look great. It would really get people to buy in on, oh, that's really Rhaegar's son. Look at that. It's the same. Yeah, it's powerful, that the potential there. So whatever else happens, that's one I think is likely. And you know what? Going back to the really old question, the one that we go against things on, I think maybe my perspective on how big a deal Grayscale will be is maybe one that goes against the grain. I think a lot of people don't think it's that big a deal, and partly because of how small it was on TV. And I've talked to some other people who are in our fandom, other people who are podcasters or YouTubers, and most people don't seem to think it's going to be that big a deal. I think it's going to be a pretty big deal. So maybe that, and especially if it relates to the Shireen stuff. But anyway, that's a lot at once.
No, that's fine. So the other thing, and I'm just throwing this out there, not saying I think it definitely will happen, but I think that it's definitely a non-zero chance of happening, is Barristan also switching sides and going over there.
See that.
If he thinks that is definitely the rightful, this is actually the son of Rhaegar that we've got going on here. If he does see Dany doing some things that he doesn't particularly like, we know that he considered going over to support Viserys earlier and then decided not to because he thought he had Targaryen madness. If he thinks Dany is getting that, then he might switch. And that would just add to this vibe. Here's this wonderful new Targaryen king with a Dane and Sir Barristan the Bold. It would be adding to the
mythos. Yes,
exactly.
Living legend. We did an episode on my channel called "A White Cloak Turned is Still White," which is precisely dedicated to the possibility of Barristan maybe or maybe not. Arguments for and against him switching sides.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he's served quite a few kings by this point.
Hasn't he? Yes.
Mr. Bumpy Cat saying, is Davos hearing the voice of the mother the closest we get to proof that the Seven are real? Very flimsy compared to R'hllor and the old gods. Seems the faith of the Seven requires a whole lot more faith. I mean, this is a question which comes up a reasonable amount. Is there actually any evidence that this is an actual thing? And the argument is generally along the lines that you've just set out, is that we see Melisandre clearly has powers. Thoros clearly had some powers that they thought came from their god. Clearly, the old gods have got that's magic and true in some way, shape, or form. What magic can we actually see, or anything supernatural attached to the faith of the Seven? I think this is deliberate on George R. R. Martin's part. That there are things you can sort of ascribe to it. There are certain healers that you can sort of say, oh yeah, they seem to be particularly good, and they put that down to their faith. As I say, we have. I wonder whether I can actually find that bit from Davos where he's hears the voice. Let me see whether I can quickly find this. Actually, no, I can. It's here now. I was going to say you can do some talking, but
you found it quickly. Good job.
I think I've found it, and there we go. So This is Davos. He's on his rock, and he's sort of almost feverish here. It says, in his dreams, the river was still aflame. He's thinking back to the Battle of the Blackwater. The river was still aflame, and the demons danced upon the waters with fiery whips in their hands, while men blackened and burned beneath the lash. Mother, have mercy, Davos prayed. Save me, gentle mother. Save us all. My luck is gone, and my sons. He was weeping freely now, salt tears streaming down his cheeks. The fire took it all. The fire. Perhaps it was only wind blowing against the rock, or the sound of the sea on the shore. But for an instant, Davos Seaworth heard her answer. You called the fire, she whispered, her voice as faint as the sound of waves in a seashell, sad and soft. You burned us, burned us, burned us. And then Davos goes back. It was her, Davos cried. Mother, don't forsake us. It was her, Melisandre, the Red Woman. So that's the quote. And as you say, it's like, even there, he is clearly quite delirious. He's not eaten or drunk anything for absolute ages. He's barely survived. He's having visions about various. And even in that, it's just like, was that a voice? Was that her voice, or was it just the? So it is very deliberately vague. But what's your take? Is there any evidence of the Faith of the Seven being real?
I don't think so. Maybe if this is the closest we get, but it's hard to pin it on something real when the man is like so clearly out in. Suffering from exposure, thirst and hunger and starving and being out in the weather. So, yeah, I mean, what's so interesting about it is we have parallels. We have Aeron Damphair, whom we just mentioned is a rare character who he seems to hear the voice of the drowned god in his chapters. And he does similar things to himself to make himself hear voices. He goes out in the really cold water naked and just... that's bad for you, but yeah. But it can cause people to have visions. I mean, this is fairly attestable in the real world. Like, people do kind of extreme things in order to like put themselves in that state. Sometimes it's just a matter of taking drugs, but honestly, there's plenty of people that go out and like sitting out in the mountain for several days, or going off in a cave like a hermit, or meditating, in the freezing cold, and somehow they're able to do it and manage their body. People can do pretty impressive things. So I think we need more than that. We need more than just voices in their head to think these are real gods. So, because our own minds can produce so much. On the other hand, there clearly are powers and supernatural elements in this world. So it's not far-fetched in the slightest, but I do think there's if we were to take all the different faiths that are prominent in the story, the Faith of the Seven by far has the least like attestable magical data or evidence to it. There's even the drowned god seems to have more than this. And even if the kiss of life is just glorified CPR basically, but George loves to do that. He loves to mingle the potential for supernatural. He likes to hide the potential for supernatural amidst the fringes of reality.
Yes, and I think this is deliberate to have an establishment faith that or establishment religion that requires faith and probably has less obvious magical elements than some of the other things. He has said he's never going to show us. We're never going to see the gods in this, nor are we going to get any absolute evidence that the gods even exist. So R'hllor, we can say this is, there are many evidences of R'hllor's power, but at the same time, maybe it's not actually R'hllor. Maybe this is just good fire magic, but they're ascribing it to their god.
Yeah, maybe the dream of A Song of Ice and Fire was all planted by somebody else.
Yeah,
we already have the concept of dreams being put in other people's heads. Blood Raven, Three-Eyed Crow, and glass candles, and that's a big old rabbit hole, isn't it?
Yes, let's not go down that one. Let's go down this other one.
Okay.
Reflective rambling in
What
the
you
chat. This picking up a question for Lady Pushkins saying, "Where are Rhaegar's and Arthur Dane's bones? Why didn't Ned return them with Dawn?" Which is interesting. Well, I mean, Rhaegar's is slightly different. Rhaegar died at the Trident in the battle. I think I'm right in saying that his body was burned.
Yes.
But that isn't a mystery. Arthur Dane, Ned put, we get told he built cairns on the ridge top for the bodies, and so the only one that he seems to have returned back with is Lyanna's, which we assume, we don't know, but we assume is because she made him promise that. So that's the working assumption we've got there. So why didn't he take it back, take the Arthur Dane's bones back to Starfall when he took the sword back? I mean, I'm happy for your thoughts. I tend to go in two things, and first is entirely practical and pragmatic. Is actually it's quite a lot of work to be lugging a body through mountains, which is what he would have had to do across mountainous passes for, I don't know exactly, but it must be at least a week's travel, I would have thought, across to there. Aziz now looking immediately as a map of Westeros just to see how far away it is. But it's not just like a few hours. This is a proper trek that you're going on. So there's a very practical reason why not. And then there's also the more psychological reason, which is Ned. It's very clear reading all of his chapters. He just wanted done with the Tower of Joy. He wanted no memory of it. He wanted nothing there. He tore the tower down.
That's where the Cairn stone came from.
Yeah. So and he didn't, to the extent that he even alienated what could have been one of his greatest allies back up in the north, Barbary Dustin, by, and you have to, it's never actually explicitly said, but not only did he not return the body of her husband, but he clearly refused to tell her where that body was buried, because she would have gone down and got it herself. And so he absolutely told nobody anything about this. And so that's the other psychological thing. He had to get on a fast boat across to King's Landing. So he headed over to Starfall, probably thought he could trust them. There are other reasons. We won't go down that particular rabbit hole. But to get there with a body, more than one body, because he's got one body already, quite hard work. But what's your take? Why do you think...
Well, here's another example of where I think we can be a little bit results oriented, which is that rather than looking at what happened, we can look at what happened afterwards. Because, and it brings up a character we just discussed, which is Edric Dane, nicknamed Ned Dane. Remember when he is first called Ned in front of Arya, she's startled. She's like, her father's name kind of catches her off guard. You do not name the Lord of Starfall Ned. If you have a problem with Ned Stark, if you have a problem with the way he handled things. So however Ned handled it, I don't think they're pissed off about the lack of a body, at least not to the degree that it would cause a rift, because something causes them to actually see Ned as quite honorable. I think we got to look deeper to find a reason why they would name the firstborn son, the heir, who hadn't been born by that point, by the way. He hadn't been born before the rebellion. He would have been born about 5 or 6 years after, or maybe 4 at least, after the Tower of Joy. So he was named kind of in honor, or like in acknowledgement in a positive way after this person that you might otherwise think caused some turmoil in their family, and they wouldn't like, well, this is the guy that's responsible for Arthur's death. Well, clearly they don't look at it like that. Something else happened, something transpired, something he said. So I don't think they're too worried about the body. So I think you're right as well. The one thing to add to the logistics of it, Lyanna's body, as well as being more personal to him and having a place that he thought she belonged in the crypts, like physically, She's small. She's not a big person, right? She's probably like 100, 120 pounds at most. Arthedain was big. The guy was probably like 6'3", he wielded a great sword. I mean, it was light for a great sword, but still, he's a big man. So
Yeah.
He probably literally weighed twice what she weighed. So there's that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's there's a whole other video series, I suspect.
Yeah.
What is it that makes House Dane love Ned Stark so much? But that's it's definitely one of the biggest clues as to what's really going on behind the scenes there. I think when George R. Martin showed us that, it's like, okay, so this wasn't just as great as that sword is. This wasn't just him returning a sword. They think he's amazing, this guy.
And one other thing to add to that, I think it's the fact that they were cairns is itself a clue that there were more people there. We already have that clue from not just the TV show, but just from common sense. Like, where were the people to manage Lyanna when she's pregnant? Was the Kingsguard Knights were supposed to deliver this child? Who pulled the tower down? Ned pulled the tower down. He can do that with just him and Howland Reed. What is baby Jon Snow that capable already? There had to be other people. So that's a big part of this. Is there are other witnesses. Willa, the nursemaid, is a big clue, but she's probably not the only one. She's just the only one that's been named. So let's not forget about the other people that would have been there that are implied to have existed.
Yes. At least a maester as well. I think is the first thing. There is no way that Rhaegar would allow his child to be born without a maester being around. And last point on this one, because you can go down the Tower of Joy for so many kilometers down a rabbit hole on this one. In Ned's when Ned's thinking back to, he went to Lyanna. He's there, she dies, and then he says it was there that they found him, which is interesting because, as far as we're aware, there's only one other person there, who's Howland Reed, and the clear implication it was Howland Reed and someone else, at least one other person, who came in. Then they being plural in this instance.
Yes, they found him. Yes,
yes. Cast Ballerina, this is picking up a question. Thank you very much. This is for Ben Randall, saying, in support of Tyrion Targ, the theory that Tyrion is a secret Targaryen. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Tyrion missing from Jaime's dream? Tyrion isn't with Tywin and Cersei. Well, I can answer this partly here, which is because I've got this open in front of me. That this is the same dream we were talking about earlier when he's with Brienne, and he has the sword, or the silvery blue sword, and the Lannisters are there, and we're told that it is. He says, "What place is this? Your place," the voice echoed. "It was 100 voices, 1,000, the voices of all the Lannisters since Lan the Clever, who'd lived at the dawn of days. But most of all, it was his father's voice. And beside Lord Tywin stood his sister, pale and beautiful, a torch burning in her hand. Joffrey was there as well, the son they'd made together, and behind them a dozen more dark shapes with golden hair." So the answer to whether Tyrion is there is that we're not told he's there, but he could well be one of those dark shapes with golden hair. It's not. He's just not mentioned. So I think I would not take that as evidence one way or the other.
Yeah, he'd still be Jaime's brother either way, because the mother would be the same.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there are things that you can say in favor of Tyrion Targaryen. I think the dragon stuff in the first half of book 1 is probably, for me, that's the strongest that we have. If you look at those opening chapters, when the first 2 or 3 Tyrion chapters, it's like he's there fascinated by dragons. He says, "I used to stare into the flames for hours." I read every book about dragons I possibly could. He remembers going and visiting the dragon skulls in King's Landing, and they were all friendly to him. And it was just like there's so much dragon imagery for him in those first 2 or 3 chapters that then George R. R. Martin stops almost completely until we then get up into A Dance with Dragons, when we start getting more of this Tyrion dragon kind of imagery coming back. Let's go to we're charging on Aziz. I'm very aware we've got over 3 hours. If you ever need to jump out, then feel free, and I will carry on anyway.
Yeah, I need to go pretty soon, but we can do another question or two.
Okay, fantastic. Let's go with Raven's Oath from Patreon, saying Beric Dondarrion's resurrection of Cat cost him his life for good that time. We cannot know from the text, but did he know that it would end him for good? Why would he bring back Cat in that state? Was it for love and honor of Ned? So this is an interesting question. And actually I've got just cut out the quote from when Thoros was explaining what happened. This is what he says. We found her by the river. This is Cat's body. She was 3 days dead. Harwin begged me to give her the kiss of life, but it had been too long. I would not do it. So Lord Beric put his lips to hers instead, and the flame of life passed from him to her, and she rose. May the Lord of Light protect us. She rose. So that's quite vague. What do you think is the motivation here? Did Beric know that he was giving up his life? Did he think that he was bringing her back? What do you why? What do you think's going on?
I think we have to remember the words of Miri Mazdur, who said, "What is life when all else is lost? When you have nothing that made your life what it gave it meaning in the first place." And Beric discusses how every death leaves him less human than he was. He forgets who he was. He forgets who he had been. He forgets whether he was married. He forgets his castle. He forgets his family. So he's just becoming, he has a purpose, some sort of, but even that's sketchy because the king that they were king in hand, whose mission they were on, or don't even live anymore. So he's running out of reasons to be alive and running out of humanity. So I think he doesn't have a lot of reason to live, as far as he's also been kind of in the way we like to look at it. I think a lot of people look at it as one thing George seems to do with the undead is that they seem to, maybe not with the whites, but maybe with the whites, they're a little less understandable, but that they seem to be focused on the goal that they were aiming for when they died. Beric is still on that mission that he was sent by Ned to bring in, to protect the people of the Riverlands and bring Gregor to justice. Like Catelyn is still searching for her family and still on that track, as Lady Stoneheart. So he's just always given himself to others. He put his life at risk many times. He kind of lived. He kind of died as he lived, and then lived as a dead person the same way he lived. And
lived as he died as he lived. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's somewhat, you can just chalk it up to a little bit of chivalry. This is in their culture, the dying for the other noble women is chivalrous, I guess. But I think it's more about just he didn't have much to live for anymore. He had no purpose. She at least had something, maybe to avenge her family or to find her daughter or something. Yeah, but there's definitely some missing pieces here. I don't, there's more to it. I think maybe it was a calling. Maybe he felt it. Maybe he was guided, but it might just be, he didn't want to live anymore. He didn't want this. Existence was torture for him. I could see it that way. Just like, I have no memory. I don't know who I am. Everything sucks. I don't want to live anymore. I'm going to pass this on to somebody else.
Yeah, I think
could be that.
Yeah, no, I think that's the big one for me, is that he does it. We see it in the Arya chapters. He's constantly sort of saying, how tired he is, how he's forgotten all of the things that he used to bring him joy. That's gone, and so I think there's a huge element of that. I also think it's quite instructive when Thoros is like saying, "No, I wouldn't do it because she was too far gone," and the person who would do it was the person who basically had already experienced the living beyond death thing. So actually, he probably didn't find it as revolting as anyone else did, because he's thinking, well, this is me, this is what I feel like. So it's not so much of a problem. I don't think we know all of the details, but I think we can get the feel. The question is, as you say, whether there's another layer there where he felt some kind of prophetic compulsion or something to go and do it, but we haven't got any evidence of it. But
just
also
an
wouldn't
idea.
want to rule it out. Ranabir Mitra, actually, I did want to do this one definitely while you're still here, because he says, salutations to you. Hope you're well. In preparation for this stream, I completed Aziz's entire Valar Rereaders playlist for A Storm of Swords, which sounds that sounds very impressive. So Ranabir, my hats off to you. I wanted Aziz to hear that. But you have a plant physiology question. In Bran 4 in A Storm of Swords, Bran calls the weirwood through the kitchen a queer kind of tree, skinnier than any other weirwood, which was stretching slantwise towards the roof, the hole in the roof. Could it be possible that this is in fact a mere branch of the actual weirwood tree, whose main body coincides with the central well? If you agree with the above, would we therefore have the largest living and most magical weirwood tree in all of Westeros? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because it is a bit of a strange. It is a weirwood tree which is sort of grown up, almost up out of near where the well is, and it does feel as if it's not something that's been planted there, like many weirwood trees are planted. It is just it's grown up of its own volition. Do you and it's clearly magical down there, and just below there, quite a long way below there, you get the Black Gate, which is weirwood. Is this just one massive weirwood tree or something? What's going on, do you think?
Yeah, there's a few things about it. It's a great question. To start, I'd say that there are some other weirwoods that we've seen out in the wild, just that aren't necessarily heart trees. Like John sees some from the Fist of the First Man. He sees trees for every direction, and there's occasional weirwood here and there. Brienne encounters one at the Whispers when she fights those renegades from Brave Companions. And this one is slender and tall, and the Night Fort is ancient. And this is the kitchen. It's growing out of the kitchen. So yeah, it wasn't, this is not its intended spot, not by the original builders or anyone that lived there. You don't have a tree just pop up through the kitchen tiles and go, yeah, we'll leave that there. So I do think it's probably something that just grew out of there, which I think might be kind of a fun way to show the power of the old gods is still present. It's always been a little interesting that there's no weirwood at Castle Black. There's no weirwood that's even that near it. They have to go all the way to that grove beyond the wall, right? They have to go to the other side to it. So I think that's kind of neat that the old gods maybe returned. But also, I'm dubious it's connected to that other tree directly, because Sam, and it's interesting, I was just looking at this chapter the last couple days, as Sam expresses just how far it is. Bran... Sam tells them how far he has to lead them to the Black Gate because there's so many steps, and he's out of breath when he comes up there. So Ranabir, the person who asked the question, seems to acknowledge this by pointing out that it would be the largest tree that we've seen in Westeros. But I think it would be truly gigantic, I think. Yes. So yeah, I'm not sure about that. I think it probably just the fort's been empty for 200 years, and this is nature starting to come back, and no better way to show that than a weirwood. Just some regular tree wouldn't be as cool. It's growing towards the moon. Maybe you get this. It maybe gives the sense that they're being watched a little bit. So it adds to the scene a lot having it there, especially because it's when they run into Sam, and it starts off as like something spooky is happening. I think I've mentioned before, and we did a video on this together, Robert, about this scene is full of homages to the Mines of Moria and from Lord of the Rings.
It is, yes. Although you then put that to George R. R. Martin, and he
He's
seemed
like,
to claim ignorance on the subject, which I
we
don't
were
know.
like, there's like 12 parallels in there, man. He's like, I don't know. It's like you even have him throwing a thing in the well and going, oh, don't do that. Just like Fool of a Took throwing something in the well. It's like this.
Yeah,
it's the same thing. How does Peregrine Took feel about being a parallel to Hodor?
I don't know. One other thing I would add on this weirwood here, which I think is fascinating, is that there clearly is a lot of old gods magic and stuff going on at the Night Fort. And one other thing just to be aware of, and we don't know where this storyline is going to go exactly, but Stannis has said that he wants to make the Night Fort his base of operations while he's in the north. And we know that what Melisandre will do if she goes somewhere and finds a weirwood tree. So what will she do if she finds not just a weirwood tree, but also a whopping great big magic weirwood door? So this is it's interesting whether we're ever going to go there, whether that's just like a plan that Stannis has that isn't going to come off. We don't know, but it would be quite a fun little
bringing up those vibes of the so-called corpse queen. That's bringing. She's starting to bring those vibes of this could be the site of where Shireen is burned at the Night Fort, if not
could be
somewhere in the south or other areas of the north, not the south, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
South of the Night Fort, which is most of Westeros.
Yes, quite a lot of places are south of the Night Fort. Let's go to, you got one more if
sure, one more
time. Caius Ballerina picking up from Mold EH saying, hi there. Hi, there's a ton of bear symbolism and references in A Storm of Swords. What do you make of all of that? So there's lots of people singing The Bear and the Maiden Fair. There's the bear with Brienne, of course. I'm sure there must be.
Oh, all the Mormonts. There's a bear.
Yes.
There's Jorah. There's Geer. Yeah. Well, Geer is dead by this point, but Mage Mormont and Lyanna Mormont. Lyanna Mormont's killed at the Red Wedding. Mage Mormont is one of the two people to carry Robb's will into the neck with Galbert Glover. So yeah, there's a lot of. The bears are important. It's a good catch. I don't know that there's an overarching theme. It's just that bears are a great piece of symbolism. They're just a common animal that's interesting and dangerous, and there's lots of types of them. But earlier we talked about all the animal symbolism just being such a big part of everything, and we got wolves, we got lions, we got dragons, but the bears are like top 10 Game of Thrones animal. Like ravens be another one, but they're squids, but those bears top 10, I think.
Absolutely. I think with that I'm going to let you go because I know that it's been a long time. I wasn't sure how long this was going to last. We've got a few more questions to go, but you've certainly put in your time, so thank you for that. Do you want to remind people where they can find you on the internet?
Well, we're at History of Westeros on YouTube, on Spotify, on anywhere you find podcasts, on Twitch. I do game streams on Twitch, and actually we're starting a new campaign with Crusader Kings 3 playing the A Song of Ice and Fire world, which is they've just added a starting point for the 9 Penny Kings. So I'm going to be playing that starting tomorrow. We're making a new campaign. I haven't even decided which character I'm going to play, but if you've never seen A Song of Ice and Fire for Crusader Kings, it's extremely well made. I wouldn't be into it if it wasn't so well detailed. It meets my standards for the matching the world in terms of ancestry and all the places, things being in the right places, and all the sigils and the words, everything being right. So good job by then. We're also in the midst of doing what's called our topics moot over on History of Westeros, where we've been picking a whole bunch of topics with polls and going to be making those episodes throughout the rest of the year. And that's been a lot of fun, having everybody participate and pick topics. And we're going to be doing the first one of those this Sunday, which is a deep dive into Cold Hands. Why does an undead ranger have skin-changing powers, and what's his mission, and who is he, and what's obviously his connection to Bloodraven and all that stuff. So there's a lot to talk about there, and just the delving into the magic surrounding him alone is a fun topic. So we're at it as usual. We're doing the things we always do, but louder.
Excellent. Well, I would highly recommend people do go and check out History of Westeros. I think I put the link to the YouTube channel down there, but as you say, there's Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts from, you can find them, and Twitch. Aziz, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. I'll have you on again this time next year when I've made my way through A Feast for Crows, perhaps. Maybe I'll manage to do it a little bit sooner than that. But thank you so much. It's been
I'm happy to return that far out or sometime sooner or anytime, really. Yeah, I love talking about this with you, and we work well together. So until next time, everybody, thanks for coming, and enjoy the rest of the stream.
Awesome. Thank you very much. In that case, let's get on. We've got a few more questions that we can go through from my patrons. Let's have a look at a question from Stephen saying there are several similarities between the Ghost of Highheart and Bloodraven. Besides their prophetic powers, they both have albinism and are exceptionally old. Do you think they are related? Bloodraven had 2 sisters. Could she be one of them? Or if she's not old enough for that, could she be his daughter? I mean, we don't know who the Ghost of Highheart is, but I think the working assumption is that she's probably some kind of if not a child of the forest. She was introduced when she came to court first. She was introduced as one of the children of the forest because she's only, and this is the key distinctive, I think, as well as the colouring, she's only 3 feet tall. So that's, and for those who work in these kind of things, about a metre, roughly, give or take. So she's very short. So the working assumption, she comes from Old Stones, which is clearly a place which has kind of a faith of the old gods kind of feel to it. And she will be there. The colouring is supposed to be reminiscent of Bloodraven, but that doesn't mean that she is related to Bloodraven. I think is the general working assumption we've all got on that. James Boris, about Melisandre in general, is there any chance that she's being catspawed by a greater power or group, not R'hllor? Interesting question. I mean, there's always a possibility, because George R. R. Martin has said, I did a Melisandre video relatively recently, but he has said that she is one of the most misunderstood characters in his story. So clearly there's some things that he thinks that we're not picking up on. So could that be that she's just being used? I think the question is, you'd have to ask who and to what end, because at the moment she's got a very clear end point, which is to be opposing the others and to find what she thinks is Azor Ahai reborn. Who else might be behind that? I mean, I'm always looking to blame Bloodraven for things, but I don't think it's him. So it's a nice idea, but I'm not sure. I don't think so. The creator JK saying, will Jon go full Fitz chivalry? This is a Robin Hobb Assassin's Apprentice trilogy reference. I've talked about the links, the Farseer trilogy. I've talked about the links here several times. There are very strong links across between the two. Firstly, George R. R. Martin and Robin Hobb are friends as authors. She's probably one of his closest writing friends. They started writing those books at the same time. They share, I think, an editor. They will have known what each other's books are covering. And there are without doing too many spoilers for that series, there are some very clear parallels between the two. The main character in that is this guy called Fitzchivalry, who is the bastard son of the heir to the kingdom. He has warging powers. He has a pet wolf. He has a wolf that he wargs into. There are twin threats, potentially, depending on which way you see this, to the kingdom of dragons, and there's this kind of weird zombie-like creatures, humans who died and basically they get reanimated. It gets a bit more complicated than that, but that you get the idea. It's set in the 6 duchies rather than the 7 kingdoms. The echoes, the similarities are very strong. I won't, in case anybody's wanting to read the books, I won't give a huge spoiler on that one, but will John go full Fitzchivalry? I know what you're talking about there, and yeah, I think that's what we're thinking. So let's go to a question from so Ranabin Mitra, a quick follow-up. This was following up your question about the Weirwood tree in the Night Fort. Bran displays an uncanny level of fear and uneasiness when being in the presence of the central well in the Night Fort, and gets really scared when Hodor throws that stone in, fearing that he might have woken something up. Let's keep these 2 analogies in mind. The green seers tied to the weirwood trees below Bloodraven's cave, and the only things that bring unnatural fear and cold in this story are the others. Is it possible that we could have a significantly important other-like being connected or attached to the Night Fort's weirwood tree? Because how can a simple well spread such unnatural fear and cold throughout the kitchen? So, if you agree with it, could the original Corpse Queen be the one attached and connected to this weirwood tree? And then you make the link across to the Corpse Queen Melisandre theory that we were talking about a little bit earlier. Credit to Michael Talks About Stuff for that question. So, I mean, I think the first thing to say is, yes, Bran feels quite scared about that well. It's a large well, large enough for there to be, I can't remember, something that's 12 feet across or something. It's very big enough for there to be steps around the inside of it going down, and for people to be walking down inside to this well. It's not the only thing he's scared of. He's scared of the ovens in the walls. He's scared of the shadows. He's scared of the whole place. So I don't think this is... yes, that was the thing he was scared of most, that well, but that's probably the more scary thing. They couldn't see the bottom of it. When they dropped something, it took a long time to get to the bottom. And then it didn't sort of splash, it kind of plopped, which made them wonder what was down at the bottom. And then he heard movement and sounds coming up from it, and he got a whole load of old Nan's stories in his head about things that happened in the Night Fort. So there's reasonable, rational reasons for why he was scared of that. And it didn't seem to invoke the same fear among other people like Hodor, for example, who was just inquisitive and dropped something down there because he wanted to see how deep it was. So I don't think that doesn't seem to be quite likely. In terms of the unnatural fear and unnatural cold, yes, I do. Although whether you would say it is unnatural, if it's on the wall and a massive well draft coming up, it could be quite natural cold. So although yes, I like all of the thinking, this is George R. R. Martin creating an ambiance rather than us looking for where the original Corpse Queen might be. That's just my personal take. Mr. Worldwide saying, hello, one of my favourite scenes in the series is the bathhouse scene with Jaime and Brienne. How do you think Ned Stark would have reacted had Jaime explained to him the context about the Pyromancers and the wildfire? Also, I see a lot of similarities in Jaime's descriptions of Aerys and Cersei. Do you think Jaime will face a similar dilemma with Cersei? Well, to take the first bit, if Jaime had explained to Ned Stark, then I'm sure Ned would have listened and probably understood. But at that moment in time, Ned wasn't in a listening mood, and Jaime wasn't in an explaining mood. So it was never going to happen. Ned, let's not forget, he's got this background anxiety about his sister Lyanna. He's just fought in the Battle of the Trident. Then he hears that the Lannisters are marching on King's Landing. He gets told you have to race to beat the Lannisters there. He doesn't. He gets in, finds that the Lannisters have managed to get into King's Landing, and they are just pillaging the whole place. The horrors of war brought to the city of innocent people. Tywin had let his soldiers loose. Ned will have hated every moment of that. He got to the throne room, and there is Jaime sat on the Iron Throne. He would, and by this point, Robert Baratheon had already declared Ned is not in the mood for Jaime's smart ass comments or anything like that. Jaime is also, he's just broken his Kingsguard vows. He's just sat down on a chair. He's not in the mood for having somebody come and challenge him when he's just done the most horrendous but heroic thing in his entire life. So that conversation would not have happened. Ned didn't hang around. He rushed straight on down to Storm's End after that. In terms of the similarity between Aerys and Cersei, yes, I picked out a few of those things incidentally in a video I did about is Cersei a secret Targaryen? And the similarities are definitely there. George R. R. Martin wants us to see these. Jaime sees these similarities between the two of them. Does this mean he's going to be faced with a similar decision? Should he kill her to save the city kind of decision? I think it just adds more weight to this idea that he is the Valonqar. He is the person who is going to kill her. Maybe he will do it because she's about to do something horrific. It's possible, but that's such a long way in the future now that I think it's hard to say for certain. But yeah, it's a good working assumption. I think it's fair to say. Howland's little sister. Do you think that Varys believes that Tyrion is Joffrey's murderer? Was Varys willing to help Tyrion escape for his own reason to facilitate his plans for future political machinations? So does he think he did it? Probably doesn't, but Varys probably also doesn't know exactly who did do it. I think he can probably guess, but I don't think he knows. One thing which is noticeable is that the more you read about Varys and Littlefinger, the more you realize that Littlefinger actually confuses Varys. Varys doesn't always know what Littlefinger's up to. And he admits that to Illyrio when Arya overhears what's going on. He basically says, who on earth even knows what Littlefinger's plan is? He's got no idea there. The murder of Jon Arryn was plotted by Littlefinger, and Varys seems not to know about that either. So there's a lot that Varys, yes, he's got a great informant network and he knows a huge amount of stuff, but he does not know everything. So I don't think he necessarily knows this. What he is doing is definitely furthering his own agenda, wanting to get Tyrion onto his team. So that is definitely there. So I don't think at this stage he cares. whether Tyrion did it or not. Either way, Tyrion had to leave the city because he had been found guilty of it, and that was the most important point. 444. Who could be included in Robb's will? In A Storm of Swords, when Robb started discussion about Jon's legitimization, Cat was opposed to the idea and mentioned some distant cousins from the Vale, and then they stopped talking for a couple of days. When at the end of the chapter, Robb brought his will for the Lords to sign, no details are mentioned, like who is the heir or if there's more than one heir. Most people assume it's Jon, as it was implied earlier in the dialogue, but it's not clearly confirmed. I don't think that the Vale cousins can be mentioned in the will, but do you think that anyone will try to use them to claim Winterfell? What if Jon is not mentioned in the will? Do you see any other option? What if there's a list of potential heirs? Could the Tullys be included in it? All good questions. I would refer you back to that video I did a little while ago, a couple of months ago, that I think the very clear implication is this was Jon. Robb legitimized Jon and made him his heir. I think that's very clear. Implication. I think the cousins in the Vale are complete red herring. Cat even struggles to remember who they might be. And realistically, would the North and the Riverlands rally around some random cousins from a different part of the Seven Kingdoms that they'd never heard of before? No, not at all. The issue with the will is more about the fact that it was supposed to get rid of this idea of there being a succession crisis, but actually it's going to create a succession crisis. It will legitimize Jon and say that Jon is the heir, but then Bran and or Rickon will appear, and it'll be like, oh, so they should be inheriting, but now Jon's been made the heir. Then Arya may well appear, and Sansa may well appear, and it's going to be a stark succession crisis. I don't think it's going to be a thing which actually puts them against each other, but I do think that it's going to be their supporters may well be up against each other. The creator, JK, if Martin won't finish in time, Robin take over? I think I actually, it's interesting. George R. Martin hasn't yet fully said what he originally said. He didn't ever want anyone to take over from him, but he has noticeably now, when a couple of his good friends have died, has said he hopes somebody will be able to finish off their stories. So I think he's slowly coming around to the idea that somebody else might do it. Tazta saying, hello, Robert and Aziz. What's your favorite chapter in Storm? It's an interesting one. I do like the Jaime chapter when we've got this whole the bath scene, but also this kind of dealing with sort of chess game with Roose Bolton, where they're just trying to suss each other out, and Brienne doesn't really seem to understand what's going on. I always love chapters like that where a character doesn't really know what's going on, but other characters do. So that's a whole load of fun. I'm just trying to think of any other favorite chapters. I mean, I really like the epilogue. I have to say, it's a completely new character. I had no idea where it was going when I read it first. This is the epilogue, and you have to remember the epilogue it's where we get introduced to Lady Stoneheart, and it does come like, whoa, here she is. What does this mean? This changes so much. And in the process of this chapter, you actually grow to not like, but sympathize with one of the Freys, which is a complete shift from where that book takes you generally. We're there very much on the side of the Brotherhood without banners. We're just going to get revenge on these Freys. Then we spend a chapter from the POV of Merrick Frey, and you actually get to see him. Could he have done anything else? Was this actually his fault? Did he kill anyone personally? No. Was he there? Yes. Does that make him guilty by association? It's there. Suddenly, George R. R. Martin is showing us the other side of something while introducing us to this absolute bombshell. Here's Lady Stoneheart. This is Catelyn Stark come back. Andrew K in the chat saying the prose is one thing, but I honestly don't think anyone can do George R. R. Martin's layers of complexity, symbolism, and nods to influences proper justice. Yeah, somebody else finishing stuff off. I'm personally of the view that, and here's hoping that we never this isn't an issue ever, but what happened when Robert Jordan died, who wrote The Wheel of Time? There was about 3 books worth still to go. Brandon Sanderson wrote the last books in The Wheel of Time on the notes that he got from Robert Jordan, but he didn't write it as Robert Jordan. He wrote it as himself. And I think for me, that's how this would have to work if anyone ever did finish off this book, is you get as much of George R. R. Martin as you can. You keep the same framing, POV chapters and the like, but then you don't try and write as George R. R. Martin. You write it as yourself. Who on earth they could get to do that, I don't know, but that's where I would say. Commander Ray, George seems to love to leave clues. Do you think he makes things too obvious, such as all the lead up to the Red Wedding? Elena taking the poison from Sansa, and do you think it elevates the books or something for the observant readers to go, I see you, George? Yeah, I think he does like to leave a lot of sort of breadcrumbs, hints to where we're going, but it's rarely so heavy. I think he does it about right, and I think you can tell by where we're at now. I think if we pay a reasonable amount of attention, we know roughly what's going to be happening for the first half of that book, the next book. We know there's going to be a battle. Well, we've seen the battle outside Meereen. We know that there's going to be roughly what's going to be happening in King's Landing. We've got Fagon going to be coming up, and having taken Storm's End, is going to be moving on King's Landing. We know what Cersei's going to do when she discovers what's happened with Kevin Lannister, etc. So we know the first few chapters of this book, but it's the second half. We can't be absolutely sure where this is going longer term because of the way that George R. R. Martin writes this. He sets things up, but normally within the book, as opposed to setting stuff up that will only pay off much, much later. Although, hey, I guess we'll have to see. Let's go to Catherine Furseth, saying Melisandre and her beliefs are more elaborated on in A Storm of Swords. Actually, I've done this one already, so apologies. So hopefully you got the answer there. Luna Cascade asking about the Sam chapters. I'd like to hear more about the adventures of Sam the Slayer and the events that happen. I think I've sort of picked up on this quite a bit going through. But Sam, what can I add to this? I think the key thing here about Sam is that Sam is both the exact right person and the exact wrong person for this to happen to. He accidentally kills one of the others with dragonglass. Now, this is entirely the wrong person because he's not a fighter. This isn't the person you'd expect, but exactly the right person because he can figure out what's going on to a degree. He says he doesn't want to, he's still, by the end of this book, he's still calling himself a coward and not wanting to build a reputation from this or anything. So the key point is that he got back. What would have been worse is if somebody killed one of the others with a bit of dragonglass and then did not make it back. This is why Cold Hands was so important. We often think about Cold Hands as being there to be guiding Bran to the north. But his equally important role was to get Sam and Gilly safely south of the wall, because the information of what could kill another was one of the most important things that humanity could learn, full stop. So getting Sam south of the wall, absolutely fundamental, as important as getting Bran north of the wall. Morally, actually, last question from my patrons. I will pick up a few more questions from the chat. Now's a good time to drop more questions in the chat. I will come to them in just a moment. Morally asking about why Melisandre saved Mance Rayder from execution. What will be his role forward, moving forward? So we've seen him go. So he's headed over to Winterfell. He's off there on a secret mission. Basically, he's gone to Winterfell, helping Theon escape, but also be the inside man there in Winterfell. And I think write to the Pink Letter, prompting Jon to head south to try and take Winterfell. So that was what his objective was that that I think that he was given this by Melisandre as a mission, because she saved him. She saved him because she thought that she could do business with him. Is the general feeling I get. It's not that there's some kind of big magical thing. It may well be his story ends relatively soon, because the point of his story is getting the wildlings south of the wall, which has happened, and now he's carrying on and following up with this Bael the Bard kind of imagery, foreshadowing that we've had for him already. Now he's done that. The natural span of his character arc, his story arc, has ended. That doesn't mean that George R. R. Martin won't create new things for him, but he's now reached the end of the original purpose of him being there in that story. Cas Ballerina saying, this book rehabilitated Jaime's character in the eyes of many fans. Who else would you like to see get that treatment? Who else to be rehabilitated? I don't know about rehabilitated, but I'm fascinated. I cannot wait for more Melisandre chapters, because she is so misunderstood. And the chapter we had hints at a tragic backstory. It hints at doubts on her part. It hints at all things that we had no idea about beforehand. And this adds so much to what she is and how she's trying to achieve it, that I don't think we can now look at what she does from now on from the outside and see her in the same way, because she may well be completely sort of certain in all her beliefs about a certain subject, but we now know that she may well be doubting that inside, which means that from now on we will be looking at her slightly differently. I would love to get a bit more information about her. Andrew K saying, we know the magical systems are real, but to me the various faiths and gods seem to be in-universe humans reconciling and understanding attempts of them. Yep. Has there been a video deep dive on Tywin Lannister? I think I might have done one many years ago. That's the kind of thing that I'm redoing some older videos just on a sort of an occasional basis when I feel I've got something new to say on something. That is exactly the kind of one that I might do. Ranabir Mitra saying, the old tongue was described as a language that you can't really teach because it's all about sounds of leaves and rustling. So if Cold Hands knows old tongue, Does it prove that he's way older? No. I mean, he speaks in a tongue that they don't understand, which doesn't necessarily mean it's old tongue, but it probably was. And who else has he had to talk to for the last however long? If he's been north of the wall for half a century or more, then maybe he has had time to learn. Quick flick through the creator JK saying, I will say that Sanderson wrote an incredibly touching note when he took over. He explained how he would do his best to take over, but not to try and copy, and to keep Jordan's story alive, but no mimicry. Yeah, I think that's exactly that's the kind of feel that I want, the respect for the story without trying to do. I mean, again, I don't really like thinking about this because I really want him to just be able to write the stories in his own time. But yeah, I don't think anybody would be able to imitate his exact writing style. April May saying Thens and giants speak the old tongue and beings more storied. Old Nan is a good reference for this. Yep, absolutely. Gavin Mint saying, sorry, joining late, but wanted to ask whether we get Jamie's thoughts on Barristan being relieved of his Kingsguard oath and duty. I can't remember if we do. Yeah, I'll come back to that next time if I find it. Ranabin Mitra, yes, I'm also very happy about Jim Ratcliffe. Okay, I think with that, I'm going to start winding up. I won't be here next week. Apologies. I've got plans for next week, so I won't be here next week. But in 2 weeks' time, hopefully, let's come back. We have been going through the houses in the Riverlands. I think I'll do a Riverlands overview of all the other houses that we haven't been covering. There's houses like the Brackens. Who else is there? Anyway, there were a few other houses that I was thinking of doing, but didn't think it quite justified having a whole episode on them. So we'll do a sort of an overview of that. As you're here and have reached this, however many, over 3 hours we've been going. At about this point last week, I did ask people about whether they might quite like me to do news updates on where we're at with TV shows and things like that, and a few people put down in the comments that they would quite like that, so I'm going to give it a go at some point in the next week or so. On this channel, IDG Live, you'll get a short video from me just doing a little update on what's been happening in the sort of the fantasy world, where the different adaptations are at. That kind of thing. So we'll see how that goes, see if it works, and if it does work, then maybe we'll carry on doing that. But I'll be back in 2 weeks' time here. In the meantime, if you're watching this back a bit later, there's a link going to be appearing here to other live streams if you'd like to watch them. There's a link appearing somewhere around here, which will be to Patreon, which is the best way to support this channel if you wish to do so. That's all for this time, though. Thank you so much. Thank you, patrons. Thank you, moderators. You are wonderful, wonderful humans. And I will see you again soon.